Kicking off our list at number 10, afterlife servant. Ancient Egyptians were closely connected to the afterlife, or at least they tried to be. After a loved one passed, ancient Egyptians would ensure that they have everything that they needed in the living world as well in the afterlife, right? Every valuable belonging, everything that you held dear to you your entire life, ideally that's what you want to take to the other side, right? And that also included, sadly, lifelong servants. These masters were thinking about their necessities in the afterlife, and of course, being otherwise useless without their servant, they have to bring them too. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? That would probably suck for the other guy, right? Yeah, it did. It really did. Someone dies, now you gotta go too. You're like, what? Forced to be a literal ride or die. That is impossibly unfair. That's ancient Egypt for you. This tradition thankfully changed before many of these famous pharaohs that we know were put into power. So it didn't last forever, this horrible theme, this idea, but it did happen a lot. Famous pharaohs came into power and this tradition underwent a change, but eventually this practice led to the introduction of number 9. The Shabti. The Shabti were tiny carved figurines that would often be placed inside of these tombs of the pharaohs. Now you've probably seen them at some point and thought that they were just a valued belonging, which obviously they were, but their real purpose was much more grand. These beautiful little works of art were always shaped like mummies, and on each and every Shabti carved into them were special instructions that determined what job they got in the afterlife. Yeah, it's like the world's oldest resume right there. Number 8. What's the buzz? Here we go. Shout out to all the bees. Cleopatra was the last Greek ruler of Egypt, and she had some bold ideas, you could say. So we're not exactly sure of its purpose, but we have some ideas. But there's a large amount of experts that have all agreed that Cleopatra, Greek-Egyptian ruler of Egypt, she was known to sometimes fill a small box with a bunch of bees and then shake that box around to disturb said bees, and voila, now we have a very weak massager. There's been some speculation as to why she created this bee box, and sure, you can use your imagination to some degree, probably yes. This invention, this scandalous idea, we're pretty sure it was inspired during her time ruling in Egypt, because, you know, all the bees. Also, to put a box of bees anywhere near your box of bees, you know what I mean? Bravo, that's brave. If she did what all these scholars think that she did with this vibrating box of bees, then double bravo. That's brave. I don't even go near one bee flying around, let alone a box of them. No, thank you. Number 7, shaved eyebrows. Close one. I thought they were gone there for a second. Look, I love animals, okay? We all grew up with cats, dogs in our family, birds. We had a chameleon at one point. That was interesting. But nobody mourned for their furry loved ones like ancient Egyptians. When the family cat died back then, not one, but every family member involved in the household, they would all shave off their eyebrows to mourn the cat's death. Cats were loved extra hard back then. Yeah, you think cats are spoiled today? When's the last time you saw your friend with their shaved eyebrows after their cat passed away? Yeah, didn't think so. God forbid, but if that fateful day shall arrive, commit. You know what I mean? Shave them off. Show them your love and shave them off. Number 6, stitches. While surgery did exist during ancient Egyptian times, common surgeries, invasive surgery wasn't quite as common because, well, 1, no painkillers and antibiotics, and 2, it's gonna hurt, and the list goes on and on. It's horrible. But one thing that's less invasive but still quite extremely important back then that was seen quite a bit during these times was the use of stitches. Yeah, probably need some at some point. Building pyramids made of stones and rocks, you're gonna cut yourself. Ancient Egyptians found different and effective ways to make their own stitches in order to close these large wounds. They did so by using plant fibers, hair, so gross, tendons, even more gross, and even wool threads. Evidence in different mummified remains have been discovered. Yeah, imagine that, you cut your arm, you have to use someone else's tendon to stitch it up. No thanks, just leave it open, I'm all set. In the oldest known surgical text, which is referred to now as the Edwin Smith Papyrus, that came to ancient Egypt, there are 48 different cases of stitches being described, and they all sound like a great time. One example from the text of treating a laceration reads, quote, "If thou findest that wound open and its stitching loose, thou shalt draw together for him the gash with 2 strips of linen." Basically says, hey, if you cut yourself, grab a shirt. Good luck. Don't move too quick. Number 5, cesspools. Ooh, gross transition. If you're gonna make a massive castle, you need to know where to build certain rooms. Like say over a cesspool, for an example, that might be important. Just plug your nose. Cesspools were often placed under floors, which makes sense because, you know, you poop and then gravity and everything goes down. But you need to make sure that those floors are supportive enough, because in 1183 the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire had a dinner in the palace of Erfurt, but the floor in the main hall broke open, resulting in a bunch of dinner guests falling through the floor, with a few of them even drowning in that cesspool. What a horrible way to go. Then again, in 1326 England, Richard the Raker had just sat down for dinner, guy hasn't even started his meal yet, and then again the floor broke and he fell through and drowned. I'd say chamber pots were safer, definitely, but when it comes to waste, honestly, just out of sight, out of mind. Just get that away from me. Literally, pun intended. Number 4, towels. I'm pretty picky when it comes to towels. I always have to have way too many just ready to go at all times. You know, in case I want a bath, in case I want to have 2 baths in a row, you never know. Today we have nicer towels at hotels than anything, honestly. We all know somebody with a Bahia Principe resort towel in their closet, and you're like, really? Really, you thief? Okay, I'm telling. Around the 1800s, flour sack towels were the best you'd get. Now, around this time, suppliers were packaging flour and other foods in these cotton sacks. This saved big time on barrels, and eventually they were cut into tea towels. Now, come the Great Depression, resources were of course limited, so these flour sacks were used now for multiple reasons. Clothing, toys, quilts, pillowcases, diapers, and of course, towels. Wouldn't feel too good on your back, not at all. Number 3, same clothes, new day. King James, and no, I don't mean LeBron, I mean King James VI of Scotland this time around. We'll talk about him another time. He had a pretty sweet idea when it came to changing clothes. You don't. Simple as that. What a dream, right? The amount of times I change my shirt every day for literally no reason, it's such a waste of time. It's like black, gray, black. Yeah, that's it. It's a waste of time. King James would wear the same clothes for months at a time, even wearing the same hat for 24 hours straight. Guy's devoted to the hat game. He just slept like, didn't move a muscle. He went as far as not bathing either because he thought that it was bad for his health. Yeah, things were thought differently back then, as you may have known by now on this channel. James became king when he was just 13 months old, and he succeeded Mary Queen of Scots. In 1603, he took over as ruler for both England, Scotland, and Ireland for 22 years. And he looked the same every day. Gotta love it. Who's committed? Number 2, unwanted hair. Pubic hair is a biological mystery, and yes, even after we hit puberty, we still can't figure it out. What are you? What's going on? So far, we believe this is part of our evolutionary history, and it comes from a time where we needed fur all over our bodies, right? Like animals. We evolved to protect ourselves against the cold, and just in general to keep that area, you know, safe. I don't know why I did that sound, but it's safe. So why is it that ancient Greek statues of women are completely hairless? Well, this was a time where if a woman's area was hair-free, for some reason the Greeks symbolized it as being pure. Okay. So in order to be considered pure, you'd have to use razors and creams, pumice stones, methods that were not as smooth as today. What's even more annoying is that men who would grow their body hair out, that was a sign of maturing. Yeah, I'm not either of these categories. I can't grow anywhere where I want to. It's just bald. I'm just a bar of soap. Yeah, I'm not gonna use a stone to shave either. Thanks. We'll pass. Next. And finally, coming in at number 1, acne. Ancient Egyptians and Greeks came up with an interesting method of getting rid of those pimples. Now, reminder, this was long before Dr. Pimple Popper was ever a thing. You ever click one of those videos and you're watching for like 40 minutes? You're like, I'm gonna be sick. Is that yogurt? What is that? Physicians back then discussed these elevated spots with black tops that can plague your skin for 4 to 5 years. But by squeezing these mysterious spots, you force out the maggot inside. Yeah, blackheads were called maggots back then, so that's pretty horrible. That's gonna be in my head forever. They would refer to severe cases as maggots that lie in bed of roses, AKA your face. That's the bed of roses. If a physician told me I had maggots in my face, I'd faint. Teeth worms and maggots, like just brush your teeth and wash your face and then avoid all that smoke. These disorders were thought to be human skin taking on the properties of animals, so that's pretty wild. So ancient Greeks and Egyptians would use honey, vinegar, turpentine, and emulsion of bitter almonds to solve that problem. Or what I just do is I just squeeze really hard, yell one curse word, and then wipe the mirror. That's usually how I do it.
Which is part of that can be done by bathing, washing away the 7 ailments while simultaneously taking on the 7 blessings. Bathing culture changed in the Edo period as Sentos brought bathhouses to commoners' daily lives. Before, they were only able to soak in the river. Baths in this period were steaming waters, with the bather often only soaking the lower part of their legs and washing water upwards. Late Edo period also brought Sufuro, which is the first bath in which bathers would actually submerge to the shoulders. Men and women were also sharing the same bath, and it was commonplace for bathhouses to be mixed. Something that freaked good old Commodore Matthew Perry right out when he visited Japan between 1853 and 54. Nudity doesn't always have to be primal, dude. Onsen, or hot springs, is a public bath in Japan that uses hot spring water to clean and relax your body, which has an endless list of health benefits from the mineral-rich water. In the Showa period starting in 1926, more residential buildings with internal baths were built, and home baths became the new norm. However, still feel free to visit visit one of the many onsens and sentos that still exist in Japan. From the bottom to the top, let's talk hair care. Long, beautiful, shiny hair, and the Japanese believed each strand carried spiritual energy, ritualizing hair but also how to groom it. Women in ancient Japan believed that as the comb passed through, it would gather each strand's spiritual energy. One of the most famous works from the Heian period was the Tale of Genji. It talks about the traditional Japanese beauty and hair care. It detailed using a fine comb and how important it was to have this long, straight black hair for Japanese women and even men at the time. All women seemingly had this Rapunzel goal, and no art was depicted showing otherwise. Aristocratic women often achieved hair lengths that reached the floor if not past. In order to keep their hair super straight and shiny, Japanese women had one effective hair care routine. The secret? Combing. Japanese women often combed their hair right up to 5 times a day. And while we're on this subject, how about the power of a wooden comb? The most popular materials were the sleekish stones like jade, polished gold, but most of all, boxwood. It's naturally oily, so the combs are anti-static, avoid breakage, and are gentle on the scalp. Traditionally, boxwood combs would have been created from trees only after they've turned 35 years old. The wood is harvested in August or September when the weather is hot but the humidity is low. Then it's dried for 3 years. The process from start to finish can take up to 60 steps, and the Japanese government officially recognizes close to 200 traditional national industries, and comb making tops the list to this day. Traditionally, women would be given a set of these combs when they married. They are used to create every possible hairstyle, from a slick back top knot of sumo wrestlers to the perfectly precise updo of a geisha. Even to this date, every 20 years, boxwood combs are sent to the Ise Shrine in Japan, where they're ritually burned in sacrifice to the sun goddess. But there's more to it than just the comb. It's all in the tsubaki sauce. In Japan, tsubaki oil was used for thousands of years as a cooking and machine oil. However, on Oshima Island, the women who harvested the oil were noticed to have long, beautiful hair and radiant, clean skin. Naturally, they'd been using the oil harvested from the tsubaki nuts on their hair and skin since it was all over their hands from working. This news flew, and suddenly far and wide, Japanese women started using tsubaki for beauty purposes. Science time! Tsubaki oil contains a very high level of oleic acid, which will control the water loss while making your hair softer and more pliable and minimize shedding. Linoleic acid in the oil stimulates hair growth, maintains healthy scalp conditions, and improves moisture retention. Tsubaki oil is non-greasy and an excellent all-around moisturizer for hair and skin. Its excellent emollient properties keep skin and hair supple, and tsubaki also features prominently in the art of traditional patterned Japanese designs. Dating back since the 11th century, they're called wagara, where it became popular in the motif of the Meiji period. Red, white, and black. The country's flag is one shade short from matching the most traditional makeup palette there is. The old Japanese proverb, "white skin covers 7 flaws," describes the obsession Japanese women had for fair skin throughout the centuries. This dates back to the Nara period in 710, when Japanese culture was heavily influenced by Chinese and Korean culture. During the Heian period, Japanese beauty aesthetics shifted away from imitation. They continued to apply the white powder to their faces, but then they started plucking eyebrows and repainting them higher, and then they blackened their teeth. By early Edo, aka the 1600s, the red, white, and black color palette was in effect. Red lip rouge and fingernail polish, white face powder, and black teeth and eyebrow pencils. Pigments were produced from fresh safflowers, became so expensive it was said to even be worth its weight in gold. During the 1800s, women began to focus more on the health of their skin rather than just the appearance. A beauty manual published in 1813 described desirable skin as being moist and naturally colored. In the late 19th century, the women's suffrage movement began to take hold across Japan. As women began to advocate for protection against oppressive patriarchal practices, the concerns for beauty began to change, and workplaces and schools began to drop requirements for makeup. And finally, from the 1980s, beauty started to move away from emulating the West. More Japanese women were able to represent their own Japanese identity internationally. Models like Yamaguchi Sayoaka, who made it onto the international scene, served as inspiration for young Japanese women to embrace their own beauty. But I know I can't breeze by something I'd mentioned, so
Number 5. Urine deep. Turns out we used pee for a lot of things back in the day, and today we still do? Question mark? The Romans used urine to wash their clothes, and even more impressive / gross is the fact that they used urine to help with inflammation, burns, or skin disease. Yeah, pee was the #1 trick. Get it? Number 1? Okay, we'll move on. Best way to whiten that smile was not a Crest white strip, but rather a facial mask dipped in the mellow yellow. Just pee. Because it's so gross. We mentioned on this channel before that Gladiator sweat was once bottled and then sold. Well, their pee as well was sold as this beauty product. Clean out those pores with a drop of Igor. Get it while it's hot, folks. This is extremely gross, obviously, but it does make sense. The ammonia in urine kicks stains away for good. That's why they would wash their clothes in the same way. Now we get it. History. Gross.
Number 4, rush plants. Today we use chic shag carpets that, really tie the room together. Sips White Russian. But back in the olden times, they used something called the rush plant to pad their floors. But the thing was, this layer of dense plant material was a breeding ground for nits, ticks, and other creepy crawlies. It was a really unsanitary situation, but what else were you supposed to do? However, this kind of flooring made them vulnerable to disease and infection. The reason being, as these floors would not be renewed for sometimes 20 years, the bottom layer, left undisturbed, would accumulate a lot of really gross stuff like animal droppings, feces, the piece of grizzle you dropped that one time, fish scraps, whatever. So it was just not, it was like basically a swamp down there.
Number 3, royal bum. The groom of the stool is a little bit different than the groom of a wedding. It was perhaps one of the worst jobs to have, but, pun intended, it's one of the most important roles. The groom of the king's close stool was a position created during King Henry VIII's reign. Their job was to wipe the king's butt. And if that doesn't sound horrible enough, this poor lad would carry the king's stool with him, like on his back like a JanSport, and then monitor the king's meal times, and they would plan their day around when they thought the king would take a shit. I would be so anxious if a guy wearing a box toilet was just hanging out near me. He's like, hey, you feeling alright, boss? You good? You feeling full? That was a lot of bread earlier. You sure? Alright, take 5. Just, I don't know. Just take a look. I don't know. I'll let you be. Just jump. You must be thinking, what poor soul got stuck with this job? Well, this job was an honor, my friend. Sons of noblemen were awarded this role. You would get pretty close to the king, I mean, obviously, but as time went on, these grooms became secretaries to that king. Pretty good upgrade. Eventually, getting a higher pay and benefits. Yeah, I would hope so. Even the king's walking, talking toilet gets dental back in the day. How neat is that?
Number 2, eagle dung. I'm honestly not even sure what to say about this. You have to have some kind of magnificent conviction to be like, I have no reason to believe this is true, but I am 110% sure that bird dung will fix it. Like, that's some kind of confidence I don't think I'm ever gonna get. Eagle dung was a common substance found in the birthing room of all places. It was often rubbed in to alleviate the pain, most often accompanied by rose water, because who wants to smell that while they're bringing life to the world? No one, obviously. Obviously that didn't work, and the bacteria from the stuff probably didn't help their recovery either. They also used to place amulets and charms on the stomach to speed contractions and put coriander on the thighs. Coriander was believed to attract the baby out of the womb. A risky move considering people either love or hate coriander. There's no in between. It either tastes like soap or it's the best thing you've ever had. If the delivery was proving difficult, they would open cupboard doors, untie hair, and perform other metaphors to help the mother deliver easier. But it's the eagle dung that really gets me here, folks. I have no excuse for them.
Number 1, the dirty dead. What feels like a never-ending maze, the catacombs under Paris stretch for hundreds of miles. They're a big tourist attraction obviously today. Horror movies have been made about these catacombs, just these walls of skulls, but where did they come from? Why were they put there? Also, how bad was that smell? See, originally the tunnels were built for Paris stone mines, but near the end of the 18th century its purpose started to shift. Cemeteries were starting to pile up, and I mean that in a literal sense, disgusting. There was nowhere to put all these bodies, and everybody else started to get sick because of them, because they were breathing in, dad corpse hot dog breath. They didn't quite know how to handle the dead in a clean way, so they just wanted these bodies out of sight and out of mind. So all these dead bodies that were laying in alleys or on the side of the road, they were gathered and then tossed under the city in these tunnels. These tunnels have been there for centuries before them, so you might as well put them to good use. And by good use, I mean let's just stack skulls in an orderly fashion and terrorize civilians for centuries to come. Beautiful.
Starting with trick number 10, Queen Caroline, the clothed bather. So I'm not gonna lie, like 80% of this list is gonna be bath specific because for some reason, royals got really weird with that. When Caroline arrived in England as Princess of Wales in 1714, she amazed the court with her regular bathing habits. She liked her skin and gowns to be clean and her servants well manicured, a completely unheard of requirement in the time. What can I say? In the 17th century, bathing was controversial. There was two sides to the debate. One that said that bathing was healthy, and the other that argued it could damage your health, except in the most carefully prescribed circumstances. Now, her frequent bathing isn't subject of this section per se, because we don't perceive that as uncommon today. The commentary is actually going to be how Aunt Caroline would bathe with clothing on. Not like those big old elaborate ball gowns, but in like a boxy slip, yeah. Wet but fully clothed, she would have been dunked with warm water, rubbed with flannel cloths, and treated with soap solutions and cosmetic preparations like May do, or the milk of asses and mares, which is a lovely little segue into milk baths, number 9. You may think I'm about to spew off some Cleopatra facts and stories, which is fair. She and the Empress Poppapea did make this treatment famous, but I'm talking about a different monarch and one funky decision she'd make after the bath. So milk baths use lactic acid, alpha hydroxy acid, to dissolve the proteins which hold together dead skin cells. Whether or not the ancients knew all that, they could tell it had a rejuvenating effect on their skin. Whenever she was suffering from a distressing malady, which is olden terms for a woman being upset, Countess Platten Hanover bathed in milk and then generously donated the contaminated milk to the poor. Lives of Queen of England, the House of Hanover, Volume 1 by Dr. John Donnan documented one such occasion, writing, "Whenever Countess von Platten designed to appear with more ordinary brilliance than her own person, she was accustomed to indulge in an extravagant luxury of a milk bath, and it was added by the satirical or the scandalous that the milk which had just lent softness to her skin was charitably distributed amongst the poor of the district, wherein she occasionally affected to play the character of Dorcas," from the Bible. Now, to answer the age-old question, why toilets are called thrones, is number 8. So, French King Louis was downright gnarly. If he was alive now, the dude would probably be one of those people that's part of like that no shoes movement and refuses to wear deodorant and just terrorizes Walmart with how they smell. He famously made Versailles so bad, it smells to this day. And apparently he only bathed 3 times in his entire life, which should probably be punishable by death, because I can't imagine someone who has literally never bathed not smelling offensive. Apparently he changed his clothes 3 times a day and had a new perfume made every week to help, but this gross little weasel really went the full mile. He had a toilet seat under his throne and he would use it while addressing the court. Imagine dying of boredom during the king's mandate and all of a sudden he starts making faces and pausing in sentences and clinging to the throne arms trying to force out that day's dinner. Imagine accidentally making eye contact. I think I'm done with this segment now. And talking of unpleasant sights, Isabelline Brown is number 7 on the list. Victorian ornithologists, that's a fancy name for bird science people, are some of the only fun sciencey folks out there. They like to use obscure adjectives when naming newfound species, especially those that are a predominant color. As a result, there are species whose names include such words as cerceline, which is sky blue, cinereus, which is ashy, and citrine, a light olive, for some examples. But my favorite avian hue is Isabelline. Why? Because of its off-color origins, that's why. So prepare to retch. Isabella and her husband, Albert IV, Archduke of Austria, were the sovereign of the Spanish Netherlands from 1598 to 1621. British folklore goes that in 1601, a Spanish army led by Albert laid siege to Ostend on behalf of her half-brother, King Philip III of Spain. Isabella apparently was feeling very, very confident in her husband's ability to win, so confident she vowed not to change her underwear until the city was taken. Unfortunately for Isabella and her entourage, her husband was not a great military tactician and the siege lasted until 1604, so 3 years. And for those 3 years, Isabella supposedly wore the same grubby underwear until they developed a range of unsavory coloration. Now, if you're currently retching, I'm sorry, but I'm not letting up. Isabelline as a color description was used before the siege in the year 1600, the inventory of Queen Elizabeth I's wardrobe. So, if the color Isabelline predates the siege of Ostend, then the expression must come from an earlier Isabella. The French, German, Italian, and Spanish languages all have versions of the word with a similar folk etymology, except that in all cases, the reference is to the 8-month siege of Granada by Isabella I of Castile and her husband Ferdinand II of Aragon. So if any royal Isabella did give their underoos the world's worst tie-dye job, then, well, it seems likely it was Isabel of Castile. So let's talk about Isabel of Castile for number 6 and her bathing ban, shall we? So, Philip II, Isabella's father, banned bathhouses in 1576. So apparently it's in the genetics to be downright filthy. This may sound crazy, but in Spain, the Christian doctrine saw bathing as a corrupt practice that could only lead to nakedness. Apparently, being a human in your most natural form was considered hedonism and something unreligious. God forbid if you splash some water on you too. So this belief was to such a wild extent, Christians often walked from England or France to Jerusalem as a ritual without washing or changing their clothes. After the the conquest of Granada by the Christians, the Muslims of Spain not only had to give up their religion to survive the Inquisition, but they also had to give up bathing. Isabella and Ferdinand ordered the Muslim baths to be destroyed and informed them that bathing was strictly forbidden. Isabella boasted that she herself, their leader, had only bathed twice in her life, and pretty much every historian takes her word for it. Makes sense that she would be so grimy they can name a questionable shade of brown after her underwear. Naturally, the Muslim people are absolutely horrified because cleanliness is literally mandatory in their religion as the prerequisite for every form and mode of worship, and by extension it had become culturally significant. To separate them from their religion and then ban their last remaining tie to it, that's dirtier than Isabella's briefs. Even when Columbus mentioned the daily bathing habits of the indigenous peoples of Bahamas and the Caribbean, Isabella was horrified to the point of rage and commanded them too, as her new subjects, to stop this blasphemous bathing practice at once.
Number 5. Hair removal. Since the dawn of hair, we've been looking for creative ways to get rid of it. Too much of a good thing, and we could all use less of it. Egyptians in particular did not much care for body hair, and the beauty standard was completely shaven clean. Now, while you or I might use a razor, or if a little tougher than I am and braver, you might book a waxing. But back in Egypt, they didn't have these luxuries. They had something similar to wax. They used a cream made of hippo fat, tortoise shell, burnt lotus leaf. And if that doesn't sound particularly appetizing, what about the alternative cream that was sometimes used made of boiled bird bones, dung, lard, milk, gum, and salt? I'm not sure there's a single ingredient in either of those that smells pleasant, and I can't imagine putting that anywhere near your mouth, but hey, beauty. Now that sounded gross, but it's just that, it's gross. It's not actively harmful the same way that Stone Age women in the Mediterranean and across Asia would remove their body hair by using a cream made from arsenic, quicklime, and water. I think of those three, water is the only ingredient in that is not actively toxic, and that's because we're mostly made of water. Number 4. Animal dung baths. We're talking about Rome again for number 4, and we'll be talking about Rome again at the bottom of this list. Let me spoil that for you. Nothing good. You're on a list of old hygiene practices that make no sense, not a list of old hygiene practices that were lovely. The Romans needed to keep their skin looking nice and clean, and so for that they would get facials out of a very natural and renewable source, from crocodile feces. Are we surprised that the people who brush their teeth with pee were also using poop to wipe their face? I feel like a 6-year-old. The Romans believed that this had beautifying properties and kept you looking young. To the Romans, a very pale face meant a life spent indoors and away from the hardship of manual labor, so it was a desirable look. So the way to achieve this baby face was by mixing crocodile poop and mud and then smearing that all over your face. Or if you were looking for a full body spa treatment, you get into a nice, relaxing crocodile poop bath. Oh, I tell you, after a long day at the Coliseum fighting lions, nothing does a body better than just sinking into a little crocodile crap. Oh, just like home. Number 3, ear spoons. Alright, let's start talking about stuff that's really gonna make your stomach churn. I'm gonna struggle to get through these last couple of bits. Earwax. Let's talk about it. We've all got it, but we don't want it. It's probably one of the worst things that comes out of your body. Top 5 easy. Well, nowadays we just use Q-tips to clean that up, although if you believe anti-Q-tip propaganda, you're not supposed to do that. Well, ancient people didn't have that piece of trivia or any sanitary methods of ear cleaning at all, really, and instead relied on disgusting objects like the ear spoon or ear picks. Ear picks were frequently made of bone or brass and were just another normal tool that you'd have on your person at all times. Archaeologists primarily found them around Scandinavian countries, a lot of Viking areas, where it was very common to keep a little ear spoon on your necklace so that you'd never have to be without it. In case you're in the middle of a battle and you can't hear Hrothgar giving you orders because you got too much earwax plugging it all up, just take your little ear spoon, just start, digging all that stuff out. I actually think ear spoons should make a comeback. That's controversial. That's my hot take for this video. Bring back ear spoons. Number 2, tooth removal. Alright, let's see if we can make me actively gag. Anything involving teeth are kind of my kryptonite, so let's just try to get through this. In the Jomon culture of the Japanese archipelago, around 13,000 years ago, people practiced the ritual of removing their teeth for ceremonial reasons. 90% of their population were thought to have extracted upper and lower canines and incisors. Now you might be sitting there wondering, why would they do that? Did they have too many teeth? Did they just have a lot of cavities? Well, in their community, they believed that the body was a physical symbol of membership in your community. You know, like how the world changes, your body changes too. And there was this belief that the mouth was a great way to display change. All that to mean that extraction of different teeth tell your story, and through a smile, people could tell about different milestones in your life. A new baby, a marriage, a death of a loved one. Kinda like how people get tattoos to commemorate things, but infinitely more painful before the advent of Novocaine. I'd say this practice is still in play, because if I see someone and they smile and they're missing a bunch of teeth, it definitely does tell a story. It just is not a story I want to hear. And number 1, the wiping stick. I don't know, man. I don't even know where to begin with this. I can't help it. The Romans. They were one of the most innovative societies in human history, and in a lot of ways, some of the most absolutely barbaric. So say you were visiting ancient Rome, and you wanted to do as the Romans do, and you went to the bathroom, and you were wondering how you should wipe yourself. Well, you would use the ancient Roman practice of using a stick that had honey and vinegar on the end of it. I probably wouldn't do that.
Kicking off the list at number 10, pig toilets. Yeah, we'll start off with a nasty one. Look, we're on the part 6 now. We're talking about some ancient hygiene practices. It's gonna get gross. It just has to at this point. I've talked about Roman toilets, horsehair dental floss, so now we gotta dive into some yucky stuff. Pig toilets began around 200 BC in China, and these pig toilets were actually pretty common. You would just go to the washroom over top of a pig pen. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty awful, but also it's all they had. It's pretty awful, but I would say it's worse for the pigs. Definitely worse for the pigs. The pigs would eat the waste because it was mixed into their food. They couldn't tell the difference. Ugh, horrible. This was one of the few options to manage waste, especially in areas where plumbing wasn't possible. I talked about pigs going to court in a recent Bumblebee video. If I was a pig, I would be pressing charges left, right, and center after this. That's so disgusting. We're at number 10, and I want to puke. Nice, buckle up. Number 9, water closets. This one sounds fun. A closet full of water. What a blast, pun intended. Back in the 1800s, all over Europe, our modern day version of the bathroom came to life. Thankfully, I'm very glad this happened. If it didn't happen, it'd be a little bit different nowadays. It takes 2 things to have a water closet. A home big enough for a room purely devoted to waste, which is amazing. And of course, running water, that definitely helps. Sir John Harington, godson to Queen Elizabeth I, was determined to invent what we now know as the basic toilet. Back in 1596, he created this idea, and people actually made fun of this guy for spending so much time working on a useless device. Yeah. The more we know. Cut to 200 years later, another inventor by the name of Alexander Cummings reworked the water closet, added an S-trap, the little valve between the top and the bottom parts of the bowl, and now we're on the right track. Then a couple years later, in 1777, Samuel Prosser applied for a plunger closet patent and got it. A year later after that, Joseph Bramah enters the toilet game, adds a valve on the bottom, an old school ball cock. So we're getting there, slowly over time. Different inventors are bringing their new ideas in, all so that we can go and take a shit. Brahman was a sailor at the time, so his water closet was often used on ships of that era. Today we have toilets that flush automatically. Once you get up or move around, the sensors think you're done, and then they blast away. If you stand and wipe, good game. This thing's gonna be making noise all day long. Number 8. Bald face. In another video on things too woke for this era, I talked about how it was once cool to have no hair on your face at all. I can't grow any facial hair, so this reaches out to me. This is good. I like this. I like punching out on this fact. Well, Queen Elizabeth I was the first to bring this idea into Western culture. She influenced women to completely pluck their eyebrows, and on top of that, they would also shave their hairline back as far as they could, so their faces would be as large and as big and bright as possible. Just right there, like the big moon. It was common for women to soak bandages in a mix of ammonia, vinegar, walnut oil, all to hopefully suppress the hair growth on their forehead. Facial hair was removed, but body hair, that was left untouched. The Catholic Church also influenced the look. Growing your hair out was a feminine display until you went out in public and had long hair. Then it was immodest. Because, of course. Number 7, loincloths. Okay, I have to adjust the jeans for this one. Going back to ancient Roman and ancient Egyptian times, the loincloth was used by all. Neat. Either that or you would just be naked. So, you know, if you're a nudist, great. Hit the thumbs up if you're a nudist. I don't know why I said that. We're gonna keep going. I found this neat step-by-step on the internet how to make your own loincloth. And it's a bit more complicated than throwing on sweatshorts and calling it a day. We don't have a lot of archaeological evidence today because these linens barely made it through a decade, let alone all this time. But ancient Romans would use leather also to make underwear, which is, just imagining that, I'm like, it's hot. Hot goat skin wrapped around your waist in the sun. We love it. We still use leather today when it comes to undergarments, but we'll save that talk for another time. Number 6, breast bags. There's a neat term, breast bags. Let's bring that one back, see if it sticks. Now, contrary to what I just explained over at point number 7, women, more often than not, didn't wear undergarments in the Middle Ages. Up here, at least. But in 2008, at Austria's Langborn Castle, something that resembled a modern-day bra was discovered. It's believed that only higher-ups, ladies of nobility rather, were the only ones who had the privilege to wear these breast bags, or breast cups. I say breast bags, sounds a little funnier. We have bags of milk in Canada, so I'm connecting the, I gotta connect the jokes. I can't say much personally, but this does not look supportive enough at all. It's like a pirate flag, it's like ripped apart, this is nothing. If you have back problems, I don't think these breast bags are gonna help you. If you're ever catching up on some 13th century readings, well, now you have an image when you see the word breast bag. This eye patch that they called support. Number 5, loincloths. Going back to ancient Roman and also ancient Egyptian times, the loincloth was used by all. Either that or you would just be naked. I found this neat step-by-step online on how to make your own loincloth, because that's apparently what I do on my free time. Thank you for asking. And it's a bit more complicated than I thought. It's way more complicated than just throwing on sweatpants or even, the towel folds like a toga. This had numerous steps. We don't have a lot of archaeological evidence because these linens barely made it through a decade, let alone all this time, but ancient Romans would use leather to make underwear. That's a fun little fact right there. Hot goat skin wrapped around your waist in the hot sun. We love it. We still use leather today when it comes to undergarments, but I'll let Adam tell you about that one another time. That's more of an at-home one.
Number 4, food as medicine. Trying to prevent bad things before they happen, it is a very human skill to have. And when it comes to preventative medicine, the Egyptians had some methods. One more obvious solution is diet. Eating the right stuff truly does help lead to a longer life, but eating the specific right stuff can directly prevent certain issues. As a prime example, the laborers that would build the massive iconic structures we know Egypt for today were kept fed with diets that include a lot of onion, garlic, and radishes. Now, I don't know if the ancient Egyptians knew the chemicals these foods contained, or if they just put 2 and 2 together, but onions, garlic, and radishes contain why did I do this to myself? Contain allistatin, allicin, and raffinate, which are very helpful when it comes to preventing diseases in the super crowded working and living conditions the laborers existed in. That allicin really helps. Another example would be to cure night blindness. In these circumstances, doctors fed their patients powdered liver, which is rich in vitamin A, which is a vital nutrient for vision. Again, I don't know if they knew it contained that specific thing, or if they were just like, I ate liver and I can see better. Discovery!
Number 3, acne. Ancient Egyptians came up with an interesting method to getting rid of those pimples. Now, this was long before Dr. Pimple Popper was ever a thing, and physicians back then discussed pimples as such. Ready for this? They called them these elevated spots, with black tops that can plague your skin for 4 to 5 years. But by squeezing said spots, you force out the maggot inside. Yeah, blackheads were referred to as maggots. That's what they thought they were back then. Imagine your partner, hey, can you get this pimple on my back? Yeah, I think I got some maggots, thanks. No thank you, that's pretty horrible, that's a horrible reference. They would refer to severe cases of acne as maggots that lie in a bed of roses. I would faint, I would be so sick. If a physician told me I had maggots that lie in a bed of roses anywhere on my body, I would throw up, I'd pass out, I'd be so upset. Dermatological disorders were thought to be human skin taking on the properties of animals. Yeah, you have common acne, maybe you're turning into a pigeon, who knows? Ancient Egyptians would use honey, vinegar, turpentine, and emulsion of bitter almonds, all to get rid of acne. Yeah, sounds like a horrible alternative. I would much rather just have acne. Maggots? Dude, I'm done with this channel, I'm out of here. That's so gross.
Number 2, eye makeup. Almost everybody and their mums knows that the Egyptians wore that crazy awesome eye makeup. But what you might not know is that it didn't just serve the purpose of making you look absolutely stunning. No, a lot of these eye makeups were lead-based. Now, that sounds pretty bad, I can't lie. It does. And it likely was for some, but it was possible that it boosted nitric oxide by up to 240% in cultured human skin cells. I don't know what cultured human skin cells means, but that's the quote. If you know, let me know down below. What the heck does nitric oxide do? Well, that I do know. It helps to boost up your immune system to fight diseases, which, guess what? That's pretty important, especially in the marshy areas around the Nile, where eye infections are actually pretty darn common. What's cool is that research suggests the Egyptians actually knew that, and specifically synthesized the makeup for this purpose. Neat.
finally, number 1, mummification. Back in the day, mummification was common, and even today we're finding more mummies. Like literally last month we just unraveled 6 more. It's crazy. We're uncovering more ancient history, which is great, but how exactly was this process done? We're talking about back maggots and stuff. What did they think about this? How did this even begin to be a thing? Well, it wasn't cheap. For starters, being mummified was reserved for the rich. It's a pretty brutal process as well. What you would do is you would put a hook, or well, they would put a hook in your nose after you'd passed away, and then they would pull out your brain and all that just squishy stuff, just out all through this thing right here. And then they would cut the left side of the stomach open, remove all those goods, all the organs, boom, see ya, gone. And while those are drying, you would put your lungs and liver in jars. And then you would put the heart back in the body. And then you would wash the insides out with wine and spices, all that stuff, turpentine, turpentines, all the timantines, just all in there, washing it out. Then you'd cover the body in salt for 70 days. That's a long time. But around day 40, you would stuff it with sand. Now come day 70, finally, that's when you wrap them in the mummy bandages. Then the sarcophagus awaits forever, really. And there's just jars of organs also stored in your burial chamber. Now we don't do it. It's not as fun anymore. We don't put our organs in jars. We don't stuff anyone with sand. We should. You know what? We should bring back mummies. Let's just do it. I think it's time.
Yeah.
Number 10, not bathing. Let's start off strong. So obviously hindsight is 2020. We know a lot more about personal hygiene now than we did, then and as well in like middle school, because high school locker rooms, what the heck. Without the knowledge of germs and disease, not bathing seemed like the logical next step for a lot of people, even though it made you smelly as all heck. When the Pilgrims arrived in Native America on the Mayflower, the indigenous tribes often referred to their horrid smell. An account from a member of the Patuxent Nation even tried to convince them to start washing themselves. They were like, come on guys, it's enough. They washed their hands and faces, but they rarely washed their whole bodies. Though they believed cleanliness was next to godliness, that didn't necessarily mean they needed water to do it. They believed that should they submerge themselves, they risked disease. This could be because they dumped their daily duties into the water, so that's likely. So instead they took dry baths where they wiped themselves down with a dry cloth, but it didn't really help much.
Number 9, bedpans. It's always the worst when you get tucked in at night, you start to fall asleep, you're starting to doze off, and then you realize you need to pee. It's the worst. You gotta get up, walk down that long, scary hallway, blind yourself for 2 minutes, and then get cozy all over again. Well, in the Middle Ages, you would just toss your full bedpan out the window. Easy peasy. Heads up. Oh, oops. It's so gross. Or sometimes, if you were feeling a little lazy, this was also common, you would use the bedpan and then just slide it back underneath your bed and go right back to sleep. If anybody ever gives you shit for having cups in your room, show them this video, show them this history. You're fine, you're not that bad. Back in those days, we weren't exactly aware of the disease that we threw out the window as well. Most of the time it was number 1, so the rain could just, wash away the yuck, but these buildings were only 1 story. It wasn't going anywhere. If you were tossing anything out, you'd be stepping over it the next morning on the way to, the public execution or whatever.
Number 8, a lead facial. Today, if you have tan skin from that hot summer glow, it implies that you have had enough leisure time to acquire such a hue. Getting a tan is the thing unless you're like me and slather on that sunscreen for health, and so you look like a newborn baby when you're 80 years old. However, it was the opposite in times of old. If you had sun-kissed skin, that meant you worked hard in the fields, a symbol that you were a peasant or of lower class. If you were rich, you tended to have much paler skin, therefore implying your status, but simply staying out of the sun wasn't enough. Elizabeth I used a combination of lead and vinegar to achieve a bright white complexion and to hide her smallpox scars. The compound was called ceruse. This tradition even goes all the way back to women in the Roman Empire. A well-known actress named Kitty Fisher was also said to have died from the material as it slowly poisoned her with daily use. The material would add blisters, so she'd put more on to cover it up. Same with Elizabeth, and yes, slowly you understand.
Number 7, Victorian Laundry Day. You spill some mustard on your shirt today, that stain will be gone by the time you get home. We're pretty advanced when it comes to quick stain removal today, but like the Romans, which I'll talk about later, it wasn't always smooth sailing. Take the 18th century for example. When Laundry Day came around, it was an event. It was like an ultimate chore. They had to take daylight in consideration and plan their washing days, as in more than one. The Victorian era was exhausting. They would soak their clothes overnight, then the next day would be spent soaping them up, boiling them, rinsing, soaping again, rinsing again, maybe soap one more in case there's too much pee-pee, and then rinsed another time, wrung out, mangled, laid out to dry. Hence the sunlight timing, starched and then slowly ironed. Cut to today, we have to encourage adults not to eat Tide Pods or drink bleach. We'll get there, maybe, I don't know.
Number 6, wigs and makeup. When you don't bathe and are overall just smelly, you're gonna need to do something to cover up whatever the heck is building up beneath that bodice. Wigs would have never become as popular if it weren't for a very specific venereal disease called syphilis. By 1580, the STD was the worst epidemic since the Black Death. Patients clogged hospitals, and without antibiotics or protection, things got pretty nasty. Sores, blindness, rashes, dementia, and patchy hair loss. Thus, for the sake of keeping up appearances, wigs came into fashion. Also the makeup I mentioned before. Balding was a huge humiliation, so they made wigs out of horse, goat, and or human hair. They also cover the wigs in powdered scented with lavender or orange to hide any foul odors, and as we suspect, there were a lot of foul odors. They weren't stylish until 1655 when the King of France started losing his hair and had 48 wigs made. Then 5 years later, his cousin Charles II of England joined the train, and suddenly powdered wigs became like the next best thing. Wigs did help curb the lice problem though, because the human hair had to be shaved in order for the perukes to be worn, but the wigs themselves had to be deloused often. And yeah.
Nice. Number 5, bread and entertainment. Hygiene is health, and health is mental health. And that means after a long day, you need entertainment. That's why you came here, hopefully. They say that after bread comes entertainment. I feel the same. Where would my generation be if not for the ability to rewatch The Office infinitely? Aztecs have been theatrical killers, sure, but they also had a soft spot for the arts. During their crazy spring cleaning festival to save the world, you may just find the Aztecs enjoying music and poetry. Some of the poetry even survived the downfall of the Aztecs and is around today. I'd recite it, but I would need some help from Chris to help sound things out. I wonder if they had a poem for a stranger that comes from a faraway land to take all our golden riches away. Number 4. More than one way to skin a cat. Here I am talking about Aztecs, and that means I gotta talk about how bloodthirsty they were. Seriously, it's good they washed their hands, because with the amount of blood on them, well, I don't have a joke for that, they just kinda got crazy with it. It's estimated that 20,000 people a year perish to sacrifice. That's way too many, dude. That's wrong. Which, if I'm being honest, those numbers probably could have helped you fight off the Spanish when they came to take everything. What do I know? Cutting the heart out of people while they were still alive, a lot of heads no longer attached to bodies, and something that's just so heinous. Texas Chainsaw fans rejoice, because the Aztecs loved a good skinning. Just a good old fashioned peel skin off. Just take it off, George. George, take your skin off! I don't know why I'm Jerry Seinfeld skinning somebody, but sure. What do they do with the skins afterward? Do they throw them into the crowd and they cheer it on? Or, cause that's just wrong, man. That's not right. That's wrong, bruv. The chief was so upset by this one that he had nothing to say, actually. The chief is speechless. He's got nothing. Number 3, multiple wives. The act of doing the deed in the bedroom can be messy sometimes. It happens. A lot of passion. And keeping that area on your body and in your life clean is important. Or so says my 6th grade health teacher. I don't know, I wasn't paying attention. But you gotta think back in the day how sometimes keeping that area fresh was difficult, especially because we have no self-control and we went a little crazy with it. Take for example that having multiple wives was a status symbol, and let me tell you something, they weren't sitting around waiting for the new season of Stranger Things. They were doing as they do on the Discovery Channel. Number 2, get your money right. Any good accountant will tell you that treating your portfolio like good hygiene is a good idea. Go for multiple smells, or invest in multiple things. Check out what's on the market. Might be a new perfume, maybe a new stock. And while you're at it, dump a huge investment into fart bucks. Okay, well maybe not that accountant, but believe it or not, the Aztecs were great accountants and had good records of pretty much everything, which is unusual because most cultures in Mesoamerica just didn't. And with the amount of gold and riches that the Aztecs had accumulated over time, it was kind of necessary. So you can understand that when the Spanish showed up, they were salivating at the sight of all the treasure that did not belong to them because Hernan Cortez was going to take it. Hand it over, you nice smelling weirdos. Number 1, wiped out, dude. Through everything the Aztecs went through or did, it all came down to a fever and a cough. And many other symptoms, actually. All of their triumphs and losses, all their sacrifices, and all the times they tried to fend off the Spanish. Futile, compared to their fight against the sicknesses the Spanish had brought over. Once there was a patient zero, it was pretty much all over. As good as their roots and medical herbs were at healing, ain't nothing gonna cure that black lung. If it can do what it did to a big handsome cowboy, then it can do the same to everyday people. Dutch! We got the Aztec sick again, Dutch. I got some chocolate though. Hope you like corn in your chocolate, Dutch.
Number 10, pea toothpaste. We're starting off strong. The Romans were an impressive people. They built the aqueducts, the Colosseum, the Senate, and I heard they didn't even build that in a day. Their society had a lot going on. Romans cared very deeply about their appearance and put a lot of effort into looking as nice as possible. And what better place to start than with a winning smile? Romans might not have had any toothpaste that dentists recommend, but they had something far more natural. Romans used liquid gold to whiten their smiles. There's a lot of ammonia in pea. It's an all-natural teeth whitening tool. You gagging yet? Thinking about that? I'm not gonna be able to make it through this video. It wasn't just used for dental hygiene either. The Romans had a lot of fun, creative uses for their pee. They would buy bottles of Portuguese urine and use that as like a little rinse, a little mouthwash. I'm actually gagging talking about this. Importing bottled urine became so popular that the Emperor Nero taxed the trade. The ammonia in urine was thought to disinfect mouths and clean up your teeth, and remained a popular mouthwash until the 18th century. They also thought that it helped with hair loss or skin care, and was used for staining and softening leather. From just tip to toe, you could find yourself covered in pee. It was a convenient catch-all for all of life's problems. Toothache? Pee. Open wound? Pee. Hair's dry? Pee. Thirsty? Let's move on to the next point, okay? And if you're looking for way more disgusting things throughout history, you already know Bumblebee has all of that and then some. We've got lists on just about every gross and wild thing you can think of from all these different periods of time. So hit subscribe. Please make sure you ring that little bell as well so you get all the up-to-date buzzes, but do that at the end of this video because I got 9 more crazy hygiene practices coming for you right now. Number 9, fleas in your wig. During the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe, there was very definitely one hairstyle that was significantly more popular than others. You already know the one I'm talking about the classic, that Washington look. A powdered wig really was the finest thing you can put on your head. It's a bit bizarre looking back on it, imagining that everyone was looking like Mozart all the time and that was the coolest thing you could look like apparently. Well, these things got pretty dirty, right? And you weren't gonna wash them the same way that you wash your hair, and you don't want to be the only guy at the symphony with a stinky head. So to combat lice and other horrific pests that would be hiding in your wig, you'd have to get flea combs to get them all out. Or the alternative was that you send your wig off to a wig maker who would then boil the wig to remove the nits. Imagine having to boil your hair to make sure that there weren't any critters living inside your wig. Man, looking back on it, why did we ever get rid of powdered wigs? It seems like it was great. Number 8, arsenic wafers. For a long time, women of all creeds have sought to have the fairest skin possible. Pale, fair skin has traditionally been seen as the beauty standard, and women in the Victorian era would do just anything to get that freshly dead corpse white look. Not quite sure why looking like a recent victim was ideal, but Victorian women loved it. And to get this near-death look, they would put a few drops of citrus into their eyes to perk them up. They would wear veils and gloves and parasols to keep their skin pale, but their favorite trick was a little something from the Sears and Roebuck catalog, Dr. Rose's arsenic complexion wafers. This sounds like a joke, it was completely real. These little white wafers were advertised as perfectly harmless and were supposed to keep you pale. Well, in actuality, arsenic will cause kidney damage, hair loss, and, well, yeah, it does cause vitiligo, which does cause a pigment loss in the skin, so you know what? Yeah, it does kind of give you that deathly pale look, but mostly it's because you are actually dying, so it's a very natural deathly look. Number 7, mummy powder. There is a lot of strange things we put in and on our body for the pursuit of beauty. We've already talked about using pee for toothpaste, that was the number 10 point in this video, so how much weirder can we truly get with this? Well, how about dried up, crushed up human remains as a beauty product? Well, in the Middle Ages, it was a practice to grind up mummies into a crunchy powder and used as a catch-all wonder cure. It was believed that consuming it had healing properties, and you could use ground up mummy for just just about anything that was bothering you. It was supposed to thin out coagulations, help with clots. It was effectual in purging of like a headache, or it would be good against a cough, against inflammation. It was even said to be useful as a medicine for menstrual cramps. It's that time of the month, just grind up a dead body and huff the fumes. That's part of the beauty of being a woman, huffing dead body fumes. Number 6, leeching. Now, this one is probably a little more well known as far as absolutely disgusting historical practices go, but that doesn't make it any less disgusting. Leeching has been used for thousands of years, dating all the way back to ancient Greece and Egypt, when bloodletting was a much more common practice. Obviously, we kind of moved on from bloodletting, but back in the day, if you had something wrong with you, well, the most obvious solution would be to drill a little hole in your head and let everything sort of leak out, and that might make you feel better. It might kill you, but it might make you feel better. Now, practitioners of the time would usually use some sort of little instrument or little tool, a little goober to dig in there, get all that good fluid out. But more often than not, they would use nature's most effective little sucker, the leech. Once attached to the patient's skin, the leeches would do exactly what you'd expect them to do. They'd feed on a little meal. Now, here's one of the worst things I'm going to tell you in this entire video. This practice is not wholly extinct. Obviously, hospitals don't have fish tanks full of leeches swimming around, and modern clinicians don't particularly support the practice, but there are still some who believe in very specific applications to save limbs. They are sometimes used in certain microsurgeries and plastic surgeries still. So, if you want to relive your history a bit.
Number 5, steam baths. Now looking back and learning that the Aztecs had public washrooms everywhere and had access to steam baths because of their irrigation is fantastic. I mean, come on, just think about it. You could relax after a long day in your own steam bath that's made by natural running water. It sounds like doing yoga there would make me feel more in touch with my inner chakras, and my mood crystals would glow just a little bit brighter. Imagine you walk into a bathhouse after a long day, and then you see me just sitting there with a towel that barely fits. Well, hey there, good looking. Why don't you come on in and pop a squat next to me? I promise I don't hog all the steam. I know it sounds like an amazing time, right? The more we talk about the Aztecs, the more they sound like a perfect society. I wonder what happened to them. I'm sure it was nothing bad. They gotta be out there somewhere. Move over, fellas, I'm coming in for the steam. The steam was thought to have healing properties and was connected to their spirituality. Women even gave birth in the steam rooms, which feels like a really sweaty time. I don't know about that. There's a lot of sweat. Number 4, Bath and Body Works. It's clear the Aztecs were just cleaner than the other civilizations of the past, and honestly, I'm here for it. There's only so much a guy can say about people being stinky in the past. I mean, really, the smell must have been horrible, especially down in the nether regions. My lady, I would like to have a child with you, but the fragrance that is coming from both of our undercarriages makes me want to get into my carriage and drive it into the nearest body of water. Yes. Aztecs were making soap like it was their day job, using various herbs and plants to create much nicer smells and perfumes. However, during the rainy months, Aztecs wouldn't wash or wash their clothes in penance. But I guess 1 month isn't so bad. Strangely enough, women wouldn't wash their faces when men went off to war. I'm not sure about that one, but hey, I'll take it. Gold star for staying clean, Aztecs. Gold star. Number 3, Bath and Body Works Part 2. Okay, another scenario. You're in the 6th grade. You're sitting at a desk and listening to Mrs. Smith, and she's going over what today's art assignment is. As you begin to reach for your favorite shade of red crayon, an odor hits your nose. It's unlike anything you've ever smelled before. And it's coming from your armpit. Puberty-induced body odor. Not to worry, your buddy has a can of the finest spray deodorant there is. He hands you a black can that says Axe. You are now one of them, and you start showing up to school dances with a seafoam pink button-up shirt with the collar popped, and a Justin Bieber haircut with the hat on backwards. Yeah, that's right. All while drenched in a can of Axe's finest. Shark tooth necklace shows every girl in the room that you're a tough guy. God, those guys are the worst. Okay, no, the Aztecs didn't go that far, but they were aware of the horrors of the classroom BO and recommended a special bath prepared with lovely smelling aromas, which makes sense. Good smells go in, bad smells from your bum, they go out. However, there's 2 ingredients that make me question things. Apparently, no odor-killing bath is complete without a fresh bone from a dog and a human. I'm just gonna leave that with you and think about how you'd feel with 2 bones floating in your bath. That's disgusting. Apparently they had to be fresh too, that's gross. Number 2, the Aztec Classic. I'm glad the Aztecs had better hygiene because for once I don't get super queasy talking about the things people did. However, it wouldn't be a video about Aztecs if I didn't talk about their favorite pastime: sacrifice. And honey, if they were giving out gold medals for it, the Aztecs would be record breakers. Sure, they weren't the only civilization to sacrifice people, but they did it with such theatrics. It would make my old theater teacher very proud. But unlike most civilizations, the Aztecs did this all the time. Whenever the calendar called for one, it was time for one. And if they ran out of people, they would go grocery shopping for more. Or actually just go to war and take people, which is not good. Just know that when a chief or a religious leader cuts the heart out of a man whilst alive for the entire city to see, he most likely had a clean cloth and water to wash his hands, making modern surgeons proud everywhere. Number 1. The European bug. It's safe to say that Aztecs, while not as clean as people today, they were striving for better hygiene, more than any other civilization at the time, really. However, no amount of hand washing, sacrificing, or putting herbs in your bath can prepare them for the Spanish. Not just the swords and the guns and invading and such, no, I mean the sickness that Europeans brought with them. It's a plot similar to War of the Worlds, except the invaders brought all the nasties with them. No matter what the Aztecs did, it wasn't going to stop the waves of lovely things the Europeans brought over. Armpits are clean, but now they got black lungs. There's too many diseases to even name, there's a lot.
About all things hairy, and how the French royalty all aspired to cosplay Rapunzel. A tale originating from 6th century Paris, France is about two princes who were going to ascend to the throne. They were kidnapped and the queen consort was given the choice: allow her grandson's hair to be cut, or let them die with their luscious locks intact. She chose the sword over the scissors. One of the princes does manage to escape, and he cuts his own hair and becomes a monk. In modern times, saying alright kill him instead of a haircut does sound crazy, but back then men who had long hair showed their power and wealth. According to the Byzantine poet historian Agathias, it is the rule for Frankish kings to never be shorn. Indeed, their hair is never cut from childhood on and hangs in abundance on their shoulders. Their subjects have their hair cut round and are not permitted to grow it further. In Germany, men also typically wore their hair long, but they would tie it up in a bun or on the top of their head, and sometimes hide it under a fancy hat. In general, Dark Ages were a time where women did rarely cut their hair, and there wasn't really any time period where short hair for women was trendy then. Lower class women typically wore their hair up in braids and buns because it was easier for them to work with, while upper class women got to style their hair with more intricate processes, using ribbons and metallic wires to help keep their braids and buns in place, like a Leia. On the other end of the spectrum, however, bold is punishment. To address why the grandmother would allow her grandson's death before a haircut, in today's world, men shave their heads for all sorts of reasons. They could be naturally losing their hairline, have alopecia, or they're just prone to hair loss. However, in medieval times, hair was considered a symbol of power for royal men, as explained. Royal men never cut their hair, so the longer the locks, more powerful you're supposed to be. So, as a man, if you let go of your hair, this was a huge sign of humility. If the grandsons from the first story had returned with shorn hair but are meant to be the throne's heirs, they would make the throne look weak and susceptible. Only monks would shave their heads, leaving a narrow strip of hair horizontally around. Other times, only in the middle of a man's head was shaved and the rest was left alone. And of course, as you may know well from our other Dark Age videos, head shaving for women during this time was a degrading punishment, as a woman's long hair was meant to be her most seductive feature. We talked about one type of head hair, let's travel down to the other: bearded baddies. Recently, beards have made a huge comeback, especially now among the young generations thanks to throwback fashion. Studies have shown that people also associate a man with a beard as being more intelligent, and many people find them to be incredibly attractive. Also, nothing is cooler than the giant dude with the bald head and like the big ass beard, you know, let's be real. Respect for beards though is nothing new. During medieval times, knights were known to grow their beards as a sign of honor, and if one man touched another man's sign of honor, well, it was enough of an insult to challenge them to a duel to the death. Now, shaving was common during the Middle Ages. Commoners would be clean shaven for the most part. Royalty was also usually shaven or had a very trim beard that was kept neat and tidy. Hilariously, however, this is kind of how barbers get started. Back in medieval times, mirrors were very small and cloudy, so they're not reliable. They were also only available to the upper class. On top of that, razors as we know them today didn't exist, so if you want to shave, you need to use one of those dangerously long razor blades. So most folks would visit the local barber surgeon for a Sweeney Todd style lineup. As we mentioned earlier, monks had shaved heads and no beards, so they took turns shaving one another as a community. And speaking of faces, the Dark Ages were surprisingly skincare obsessed. Vikings are remembered as some of the most hygienic of historical people, and they were reported to have the best practices of personal hygiene in the early Middle Ages especially. Most notable was the near daily bathing they did in the cold waters of fjords and rivers. They used combs made out of ivory or ornate wood carvings, and they practiced braiding their hair for prestige and ranking. The daily practice of bathing and personal hygiene actually was what spared the King of Poland from an outbreak of plagues that had been seen in Europe. Meanwhile, in England, bathing was not as common as it is today, and it was often reserved for special occasions. People would usually wash their hands and faces regularly, however. The ideal woman in the Middle Ages had that pale, smooth skin without any pockmarks or blemishes. Nearly everyone washed their face with cold water at the end of the day, even if they wouldn't wash the rest of themselves for inexplicable amounts of time. Some women used ointments made of animal fat in order to keep skin soft and smooth. And crystal girlies, even back then, people believed in the power of gemstones to heal. Women would lick amethyst and rub it over their pimples to make it go away. But rest assured, when it's bath time, you were naked in a crowd. In many Middle Age cultures, public bathing was commonplace. The Romans, Egyptians, Greeks, they were especially known for their bathhouses. And in the spring and summer, commoners could be spotted using streams and rivers to take a bath on a nice warm day. Back then, this wasn't seen as being indecent or strange. Water was scarce, and the process of heating a bath was time-consuming and expensive. So it was also common to share bath water among a lot of people and be less wasteful. However, people are still humans after all, so like teens at a pool party, public bathing became associated with a certain level of sensuality. Seeing as this was a time period where intercourse was usually in hearing or seeing range of your imminent direct family, it's not a surprise this happened, let alone the fact nobody actually cared if it was. Well, except the church. They threw a bunch of laws around to try and limit that crap, but that's always what they've done. Anywho, in Japan, they still continue the tradition of public bathing in hot springs to this day. However, they have the option to segregate men from women, so it's not as often that people leave the public bathhouse to hook up nowadays. Not to get you guys too excited either, but...
Number 5, breaks. Yeah, I've never broken anything, and I don't plan to. This sounds like the worst thing. I see it on Reddit, and I'm like, ooh. But living in ancient Egypt, you're gonna break a bone or dislocate something sometime. But back then, it's not like you can just head over to the emergency and get an x-ray or a cast and then get your buddies, a couple of pharaohs to sign it and get some crutches and be on your way. No. So how did they treat broken bones or dislocations back then? Well, we can look at one example from that Edwin Smith papyrus that I mentioned earlier, where there was a patient with 2 dislocated clavicles. Now the treatment here is described as follows. If thou examinest a man having a dislocation in his 2 collarbones, thou shalt find his 2 shoulders turned over and the heads of his 2 collarbones turned towards his face. Imagine reading this and you're like, okay, I think we turn this way? No, this way, hang on. Thou shouldn't cause them to fall back so that they rest in their places. Thou shalt bind it with stiff rolls of linen, and thou shalt treat it afterwards with grease and honey every day. Yeah, if you break something, don't put grease and honey on. Go to the doctors. Hit that thumbs up. There we go. The more we know. Number 4, dental surgery. Okay, so back in the ancient Egyptian world, it's not like you can go to the dentist, get your teeth checked and cleaned, whatever, once a year, however you do it, I don't know. And the diet of the ancient Egyptian was most definitely not exactly, you know, the cleanest, if I can say that. You wouldn't have a set of pearly whites every single day, that's for sure. And that's due to the fact that the tools used to grind food would often leave traces of sand and or stone behind, which, well, in your mouth is not gonna feel too good. That would cause tooth loss or troubles at an early age. Through documents found, there have been a few different dental treatments from that time, and they're a little interesting, like topical treatments and such. But one case was able to give us a glimpse into what is believed to be the treatment of an abscess. And yeah, buckle up. Even more interesting is a mummy that was found from the 4th dynasty. Now this mummy, in his first molar, a bunch of surgically produced holes were there that they believe were used to drain an abscess, which clearly gives us some very tangible evidence that dental surgeries were performed back then in some way, shape, or form. I mean, in the form of a bunch of holes, and it's disgusting, but they tried. And do remember, as you're watching this entire video, all this was done without any anesthetics. So drilling holes, breaking bones, putting linen into your arms, you're gonna feel all of it. Number 3, Anubis. Anubis, the ancient Egyptian god of mummification. Yeah, he had an interesting hobby, this one. Anubis, historically, he oversaw the embalming process during mummification. A lot of steps involved in mummification, so the backup here, you know, the backseat driving, that is Anubis, I'm sure was appreciated. Ancient Egyptians were so sophisticated in the mummification process that they also had to get really good at another major, well, kind of creepy surgery, and that is the post-mortem dissection. That matters, that's a pretty important step. See, in order to mummify the body, body, they needed to remove any moisture from it. Now this process included the removal of brain tissue, which was done through quite a gruesome hook tool and some steady hands, that's for sure. This was not a medical practice, however, it was more of a spiritual one, right? It wasn't done by doctors, and this is exactly why they were getting extra up close and personal with internal organs during this process. The medical information they gathered during this process was never used for medical or medical advancement, but rather for spiritual, like Anubis, this ancient wonder. He kept trophies from those that he embalmed, like, you know, different parts from people, that kind of thing. Word spreads, you know, hey, Anubis likes body parts, pass it on, this guy's weird. So in turn, for centuries now, Egyptians would then offer pieces of lifeless bodies to Anubis. They're like, you know what, hey, heard you like toes, big guy. Here you go, enjoy, put that in your jar. You love it. Whoever gave him the jackal head, great call, that was a great call. He loves that one, big fan. Number 2, dirty trick. The god Osiris ruled over ancient Egypt, but it wasn't an easy path, okay? Just like ancient Rome, there's always a jealous brother or jealous someone watching from the bushes, okay? Osiris's brother, Set, he was a jealous one, so he tried to take out Osiris at every single turn. Now, one elaborate plot was so crazy that it actually worked. This was like a saw trap setup. This is insane. So first, Set designed a coffin that fit Osiris's measurements, like to a T. So at a party, casually one day, Set challenged Osiris to hop into said coffin, saying, challenging that if he can fit inside of it, the coffin is his. Yeah, like a gift. So for some reason, Osiris accepted the challenge, he jumped in, and as soon as Osiris got into the coffin, bam, Set locked him inside and threw the coffin in the Nile River. So in turn, Set then took over control of Egypt. Yeah, gotcha, got the last one there. So if any of your coworkers want to show you a coffin in the break room, respectfully decline the offer. It's probably a trap. And finally, number 1, scarab worship. Yeah, we're getting stinky for the last one. Ancient Egyptians, they worshipped scarabs. They worshipped dung beetles. Now, when we think about animals in relation to ancient Egyptians, we go to cats first. But really, it was dung beetles the whole time. They're OG, those little stinkers. Egyptians could not keep their hands or their minds off of dung beetles. The Egyptians would observe scarabs rolling these balls of dung, and they would roll them along the ground until suddenly each beetle would disappear just like that into a hole in the sand. Now, ancient Egyptians compared these patterns to that of the sun, which of course would go over and then leave at the end of the day. Just the ball rolling and then disappears. I can see the connections. Now the god Khepri was depicted as a man with a massive scarab as a head, so he was responsible for rolling the sun across the sky every single day. And no, the sun wasn't a big ball of poop, it was just a big ball of life. Kicking off our list at number 10, rat poison. Yeah, this one's pretty gross right off the hop. During the 16th century, it was common to fill your house with arsenic trioxide to keep rats from your food supply, right? You don't want those guys hanging around, they're bringing the plague in, a little nasty. Barbara Gilbert of Leicestershire, she thought that she was grabbing flour and ended up mixing this stuff with milk. That was a really bad mistake. She thought she was preparing a meal for her family when really she was about to poison them. Now it's horrible to say, but Barbara, she took a sip thankfully before her family, and then she was thankfully the only person who lost their life because of this, poison that they made. It's tragic, but it could have been much worse. Everyone dying because of a rat poison plague, that's pretty horrible. But it happened again in 1599 when Margaret Morland thought she was giving her husband ale. Really, it was arsenic trioxide and water, aka not ale. God, that would really suck. What a horrible mishap. Number 9, famine. Back in medieval times, food supplies solely relied on good weather and proper harvests. And obviously, lack of rats definitely helps. If the seasons were dry, people of course starved. More often than not, common folk would survive on rations of berries, corn, and wheat. Now the lack of food of course led to disease. Now if they didn't starve to death, illnesses like tuberculosis, smallpox, typhoid, influenza, and mumps often did the trick. The Great Famine of the early 14th century was historically awful. Between 1315 and 1322, it rained for 150 days at a time. That's a lot of water. Western Europe was a mess. These conditions took the lives of 15% of England. Farmers couldn't plant or harvest crops, and the winters during these years were historically bad as well. Insane rainfalls and severe freezing. We're still struggling to adapt to weather changes today, but imagine the dark ages. Weather sucked every day, it was horrible. Number 8. Weather witch. Aside from that little ice age I just referenced, what was the weather like for most of these medieval travelers? 5 seasons of Game of Thrones, they talked about winter coming, but what were those winters really like? People in the 1400s believed that bad weather could be caused by the behavior of wicked people, like killers, those who sin, incest, that was a pretty bad one. Game of Thrones would have been screwed off the hop, that would have been a lot of horrible weather. Even family arguments were to blame. You talk back to your mom, next thing you know, the crops are frozen. Nice, way to go, Eric. It's on you. Now this eventually linked back to blaming witches or sorcerers who some believe could control the crops and or weather. Yeah, sorcerers controlling your crops, imagine that. The Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1486, this book straight up references a witch that would fly in the air and create storms. Yeah, with effects that took lives of animals and farmers. No thanks, I'm glad we don't have any of those floating about. We just have drones now, which are just as annoying. Number 7, Jesus take the wheel. With witches to blame for hailstorms, who do we turn to fight the powers of evil, right? How do we get some goddamn crops back in the game? From the 14th to the 16th century, the ice pack grew around the world. Weather was changing in a drastic way, and by 1550, there had been an expansion of glaciers worldwide. Everyone thought that it was witches causing it. It's like, no, just plain old science. Back then, the general public didn't know what was happening. They didn't have Neil deGrasse Tyson explaining the phenomenon on a podcast. So people in the medieval times would perform rituals for harvesting crops in hopes that something would change. There would be special prayers, charms, beautiful services, all to ensure proper weather and fertility of the fields. Certain saints, like historical saints, they were believed to protect against harsh conditions. To protect us from the frost, we had Saint Servais, and to shield us from the winds, we had Saint Clement. And to fight back against drought and the rains, we had the one and only Saint Elijah, or Elijah. The power of the saints and the Virgin Mary were believed to protect against storms and lightning, so that's like the medieval version of the Avengers, I guess. 'Tis the season. Thank you, Saint Mary. Let's keep it dry. Canada has a huge storm coming tonight, so could use some of that saint power ASAP. Number 6, violence. Imagine going outside in medieval times. Is it dangerous? Is it lonely? Is it full of criminals? What's it like? What were those odds like just to get home? Street violence and brawls in taverns were as common as they are today. And like we saw a few times in Game of Thrones, peasants got a bit fed up from time to time. Yeah, can't imagine why, huh? Vassals would revolt against their lords. This happened historically a few times. The rebellion of peasants in Flanders, this went down in 1323, and then 60 years later, England saw the peasants revolt in 1381. A lot of peasants getting fed up. Yeah, I would assume. I'm surprised it took that long, really.
Uhaguro is next. As mentioned in the Heian period, yes again because they were the hygiene and beauty trend-setting period of Japan, Japanese beauty products broke free and created a distinct aesthetic of their own. This included the long straight hair, white powdered face, yada yada, and an unusual beauty ideal, the blackened teeth called ohagaro. Now, it's usually done for the first time during puberty to celebrate maturity and growing beauty for women. Not to mention the charcoals used for it are incredibly good for your teeth. During Heian, purely black items were considered pure and beautiful, and people wanted to imitate that as much as possible. What's new about that? Make it the model for the Kardashian family. Teeth as black as night were seen as beautiful and remained popular as a beauty ideal until the 19th century. Many Westerners who visited Japan described the practice as repugnant because the Japanese custom disfigured the women by making them intentionally unattractive. Naturally, Westerners didn't even see their women as human beings, just walking baby machines, so they couldn't wrap their pea brains around the concept. A woman's appearance is not always about or for them. Many still can't in modern times. However, many Japanese girls were allowed a relatively large degree of both social and sensual liberty. This social ritual is a celebration of the determination of mature women. And while we're on the topic of teeth, how about dental ablation and avulsion? It's hygiene, it's beauty, it's the deliberate taking out of teeth. 3 birds, 1 stone. In Jomon culture in the Japanese archipelago, dating back 13,000 years to 23 years BP, practiced this ritual extensively for ceremonial purposes and during rites of passage. 90% of their population had extracted upper and lower canines and lower incisors, usually when the recipients were between late teens and early 20s. Tooth ablation is explained by the archipelago belief that the body is a physical symbol of membership in social community. It can be shaped by and contributes to its environment. Like how seasons change and tides turn, we evolve. Changes in social environment can affect patterns and choices of body modification. As the mouth is the primary social organ, teeth are one of the most visible parts of the body that can display change and thus be treated through some form of modification, chipping, filling, whatever your choice. In layman's terms, life milestones were commemorated by the extraction of different tooth classes. With a flash of a smile, one would know about the individual's family, if they were an adult or not, if they were married, if they had experienced the death of a loved one, or if they had any children. There was no need to ask because your body openly displayed your identity. Pretty cool, right? Since we're on a roll with teeth, let's dive into body modification. A section about Japanese people in the records of the 3 kingdoms, written by Chinese bureaucrat Chen Shao in the late 3rd century, describes how the men of Wa, which is the oldest recorded name for Japan, tattooed their faces and painted their bodies in pink and scarlet. The tradition derived from how they decorated their bodies in order to protect themselves from large fish when diving underwater for food. Tattoos were also present in the indigenous Ainu of Hokkaido and the natives of Okinawa. The women of Ainu, a tribe considered descendants of the Jomon people, bore tattoos around their mouths and the back of their hands. The mustache-shaped tattoo around the lips holding symbolic purposes of warding off evil spirits and indicating readiness for marriage and assuring a woman's place in the afterlife. On the southernmost Ryukyu Islands, women had the backs of their hands and fingers tattooed to ward off bad luck and get along with their mothers-in-law. The logic being that any woman who can endure that pain could also endure that of having a mother-in-law that annoying. These indigenous Japanese tattoo cultures were outlawed during the Meiji period, however, making this art form a vanishing tradition. To protect heritage, you can actually get these tattoos for free on Oshima Island. Every culture found its way to reuse and reduce. The tosu is an important aspect of the Zen tradition and counted among the Shichidogaran, the 7 indispensable buildings found at every Zen complex. 3 of these structures, tosu included, are referred to collectively as the Sanmukaduo, aka the 3 silent halls. See, they can put rules like that in because nobody in that place was eating Taco Bell at 2 a.m., so toilets could be quiet. In earlier times, people in Japan did not consider the toilet to be part of the house. It would always be found in an additional attachment with a specifically designated pair of slippers only meant to be worn while using the toilet. Do not wear them in the house. If you're rich, you had your own. If you're poor, you likely shared with a neighbor. Before the westernization of the country, human waste was tactically used as fertilizers. By emptying number 2 only cesspits, excrement wouldn't seep into subsoil or flush into rivers that fed our drinking supplies, as was done in the West. And the reason the Westerners were dropping like flies from disease or walking infections whenever they traveled. By properly storing, using, and refreshing it as fertilizer, Japanese also upheld crops the Westerners couldn't. But the people who showered once a year were grossed out by it, so the Japanese folks stopped the cess fertilization. They both mean the same thing. It's beard hygiene. In Japan, there's only one word for facial hair, with the exception to eyebrows, and it's hygiene. Could be sideburns, a mustache, a beard. That's the name for those facial hairs. It also happens that the word self-deprecation in Japanese is also pronounced hygiene, so we can already feel the direction this is going. From the medieval period to the beginning of the Edo period, if you were a samurai, you had facial hair as it was a symbol of power that made them appear intimidating, solemn, and dangerous. Those unable to grow these bushy symbols of manliness were shunned and ridiculed, like Japan's second unifier, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who had to crazy glue these things on his face every day. Not kidding, Google it. Then, a little into the Edo period, there was a big switch. It was Japan's period of peace, and suddenly, facial hair was viewed as unbridled sign of aggression. So, 17th century law prohibits even those with the lushest of beards from displaying their grandeur, unless you had a facial scar. So, you can either be baby-faced, or you can give yourself a cool-ass face scar and grow an epic beard. Huh? What you choosing? When overthrown Western fashion came into Japan and beards and mustaches were popular again. Portraits from this era often have the cartoonishly large ones. It doesn't last long though, and clean shaven becomes popular again. So why no beards still today? It's hygiene. Quite literally, yeah, but in a non-literal sense and in our definition of the word. Surveys continue to show Japanese people, particularly women, have the opinion that facial hair is correlated with uncleanliness.
And coming in at number 10, baths. From bath bombs to jacuzzis, when did people exactly start warming up that cold river water to sit in for some R&R? Well, apparently the Romans were the first to think about warming her up. I don't really know if they had it in mind that warm water works better and faster to clean and rid of microparticles and had more of a oh mentality, but one way or another they did it. Were they really ahead of their time though? The first bathhouses have been discovered in Rome approximately being built somewhere in the 2nd century BC. The first of its kind, from a river of cold water to the abundance of over 500 steaming prominent bathhouses. You could pamper yourself head to toe for a small price, small enough so that even the poorest could bathe. That's a lot of small business owners. Hottest water in town, step right up, step right up. The Romans came up with an idea to build a spa house thing which could be flooded and heated by the floor beneath it. With a giant fireplace inside the spa, it was lit by hand and blown through the vents under the floor. Damn, they were smart, huh? Hot and steamy and good for the body. And clean. Well, cleaner. The bathhouse was a technology of its own, and it seemed like humanity was headed in the right direction. No, they were not. Number 9. Wiping. Do as the Romans did. It's thought that these people thought of literally everything before us. Oh yeah?
How about pogo sticks? Think of that? Huh? Pogo-onitis? No, you didn't. Look that up, did they? Over the years I've had some pretty jobs, but nothing as shitty as this one. Literally. Sire, would you like fronteth to backeth or backeth to fronteth today, sire? That's right, there was a job for that. People had to have had started wiping at some point, right? But who exactly and when? The groom of the stool, chief gentlewoman of the privy chamber. Call it whatever you like, we know what they did. So what exactly did they wipe with? Well, usually hay, sticks, fur, or even seashells. Every single one of those sounds itchy and terrible. I know what Charmin can do sometimes, and I can't imagine what a piece of oak could have done back then. Was there splinter taker-outers as well? I can't help but feel, although how painful and stinky it was, I'm sure there was at least one shared laugh, a little quality time spent with some royalty to say the least. Although this career is speculated, both King Charles I and King James I had them, so unless they decided they wanted to do that after them, someone must have continued doing it. I hope for a pretty penny at least. Those waste management dudes have pretty good benefits. Filing your taxes looking for a job description? Yes, here it is, wiper. Number 8, urine. Okay, is this just gonna be disgusting the entire time? Well, the answer is yes. History's pretty disgusting. Okay, this one is weird because right when we think we figured it all out, something jarring happens, like a jar of piss, and all the health benefits it had throughout history. I'm sorry, what? Well, at least they thought it did. In ancient Rome, not only was this liquid gold sold for, well, gold, it was often traded as a prominent good, sold for its multitude of healing purposes. You see, people have been using urine for thousands of years. That's right, this destructive, toxic bodily fluid could be repurposed, salvaged into many different topicals and treatments. From hair loss to your daily skincare routine, it was not only great for staining and softening leather made for shoes and clothes, it was a natural teeth whitener and antiseptic. That's right, from ancient Rome to as late as the 20th century, people have been tinkering and tailoring with their pee. Egyptians did it, Greeks did it. Urine is the body's natural antiseptic and was soon turning septic. Like the science behind this alone is what your buddy tells you, you know what I mean? Oh, rolled ankle? Yeah, just piss on it. Got ghosts? Just pee on it. The ailment for all your needs. Disgusting. Number 7, teeth. Invented in 1488 by Sir Robert Tooth. Okay, I'm joking, no. Teeth were never officially invented, but what we did for them and how we cared for them had people scratching their heads for the last millennia. We've all had a toothache at some point in our lives, so they must have had them back then. In fact, oral hygiene was utterly disgusting. I didn't brush my teeth after my coffee and I can already feel it. Ew. People's teeth were so bad throughout history that dentists were actually training and teaching each other what to do about the huge toothworm problem. That's right. Imagine worms growing inside your teeth. Well, due to the swelling and pressure, people thought there were actual bugs or evil spirits living within their sore tooth, serving them extreme pain. Nope, just an infection. You need a root canal. Oh, and actual worms and bugs living in the tooth. Yeah, you see this gray area right here? That's a ladybug, right? It's medieval England and things were pretty medieval. Right down to the surgery, and if you had an impacted wisdom tooth, well, that wasn't covered. England, 400 AD. People started this new trend of oral hygiene cleaning, but it wasn't spin brushes and floss, no, more like mint and vinegar and prayer. Just kind of swoosh it all around in your mouth and wipe your teeth with your shirt and call it another year. If you were lucky enough to rinse your mouth out at the time, then you could have saved yourself a visit to the medieval dentist chair. Well, actually just a slab of rock you sit up against and have a friend who's good at ripping. And there you go, buddy. Hey, wake up. The infection alone from the dirty tools going into your mouth is making me itchy. I feel like my breath stinks more now after I've read this topic. Anybody have any gum? Number 6, toilet paper. Finally, something we recognize. Invented originally in China in 851 from the Tang Dynasty, these soft fabric sheets were designed for, well, you know what it was designed for, but yes, mostly the emperor's bathroom breaks and soon caught on for the Commonwealth as well. The higher the class, the softer and more luxurious the material. From leather to silk, butts were seeing a kinder, gentler side of hygiene. 2-ply bark versus 4-ply silk. The use of toilet paper throughout Europe is a messy one. Again, wipers and hay and stuff like that. It wasn't until the toilet paper rule created by Joseph Gaiety in 1857 that this hygiene method would solidify and stay for keeps. The classic under versus over is the tale as old as time. You ever want to get into a quick argument at someone's house? Just peek in the loo, see if they're rocking beard or mullet. It's the simplest way to have a know-it-all show you the patent and tell you how to wipe your own ass. Charmin'.
Yeah, so number 5 is the highly debated blood baths. Oh, you thought Kim Kardashian invented the vampire facial? Girl, please. The culture vulture ain't got nothing on this. So, enter Elizabeth Bathory, who was either genuinely a menacing sociopathic killer or a pawn incriminated by family. If she was the first one, then you could definitely count her fave beauty hack as uncommon. So, Bathory is often proclaimed as the most prolific female killer of all time, accused of more than 600 plus young women's deaths inside her lavish castle. According to legend, she believed bathing in virginal blood would grant her eternal youth. And according to witnesses, if you want to believe a bunch of biased people after her money, Bathory's crimes took place between 1590 and 1610, with the most vicious happening after her husband's death in 1604. And it would take the blood of 3 maidens to fill Bathory's clawfoot porcelain tub. She would also use the blood as lip tint and rouge, and Bathory's alleged crimes have inspired films, plays, operas, television shows, and even video games. And you may be wondering, what is that exotic scent? Well, it's number 4, dead cat musk. Henry VIII had some fun and fabulous hygiene habits. He invented groom of the stool, didn't bathe often, and when he did, it was in an olden age version of a wooden jacuzzi tub, and he always had someone else wash his undercarriage. Sometimes while taking these baths to ease the pain in his sore leg, Henry soaked a mixture of herbs, musk, and civet. What is civet? Well, the segment's name should probably imply it's a dead cat. It's a fancy kind of dead cat to be particular because it's small, wild, and carnivorous with a super distinct smell. I am not sure what cat musk smells like, but if it's anything like the smell of their spray, I am more than okay with not knowing. Like many people of his day, Henry also went to bed in a piece of fur so that fleas and lice would jump on it and not his royal skin. Which begs the question, wouldn't the fleas be confused if you smelled like a dead cat? Banned from drinking it but love to bathe in it. Number 3 is Mary Queen of Wine. Get it? Because she's usually called Mary Queen of Scots, and Scots sounds like Scotch. Went too far with it. That's okay. Anyways, so apparently Mary Queen of Scots wouldn't bathe in mere water but in sweet white wine, as she believed it to be good for her complexion. She wouldn't touch a drop of the drink, being staunchly religious, but she still kept wine stores just to have poured in her bathtub, believing it to make her look pale and beautiful. Also, Mary equipped this as a form of pain relief. With venotherapy, including wine massages, facials, and baths remaining popular today, this shouldn't actually come as a surprise, especially because wine baths can be traced back to the times of Greece and Rome. There's even a very famous 16th century recipe called affar balafashia, which translates to make a beautiful face. And it has a recipe to create a cosmic brew by boiling rosemary flowers with white wine. Quite a few people have tried it, as you can find the recipe online, and one tester group was called the Beautiful Chemistry Project, which studies its effects on skin quality and discovered that the process released essential oils and chemicals with antibacterial, moisture-binding, collagen-growth stimulating, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, brightening, and soothing effects. Number 2 is the stuff of nightmare. It's the permed wig. This really came as a shocker and is quite weird. So, when King Charles II had intercourse with ladies, he would collect some of their down there hair, and then he would stitch it into a wig, which he donated to a club for rich nobles, I don't know, to like look at it, and then it was stolen from that club, where someone starts another club where people came just to kiss the wig thing. Anyway, so King George IV was so inspired by this, he started doing the same. But unfortunately, he failed to complete his down there hair wig because he died before he finished collecting enough hair. Yeah, moving on. And last but not least, number 1, ohaguro. So, the Japanese custom of blackening one's teeth is an ancient practice, whether in the famous Genji Monogatari, a book from the 12th century that is considered the world's very first novel, or in various fairy and folk tales. The art of blackening one's teeth held a prominent place in Japan's history for some time. One of the main reasons for ohaguro is the fact that for hundreds of years, pitch black objects were regarded with immense beauty. It's only natural that people want to get closer to what they deem as beautiful, just like the process of having one's teeth bleached to appear more white in modern times. So, using a solution called kanemizu, made out of ferric acetate from iron fillings mixed with vinegar and tannin from vegetables or tea, the custom was first used to celebrate someone's coming of age. Around the end of the Heian period, teeth blackening was done by adult aristocrats and nobles regardless of gender on a daily basis. By the time we hit the Edo period in 1603, teeth blackening is a sign of nobility and aristocracy is exclusively, especially amongst wealthy married women trying to mimic the allure of a geisha. Even now, when walking the streets of Kyoto, Japan's old capital, it's not uncommon to meet a mako with pitch black teeth. As you might know, during the end of the Edo period and the beginning of the Meiji period, Japan was visited by Western foreigners after almost 200 years of seclusion. Being used to Western beauty standards, many visitors were shocked to see women with black teeth walking around. Some even thought that the Japanese people had terrible mouth hygiene, mistaking the dye for actual tooth rot, and then others, having realized the blackening was on purpose, wondered why Japanese women would disfigure themselves. Okay. So ohaguro was banned by the Meiji government in 1870 to appeal to Western opinions, and the art of dyeing one's teeth was almost forgotten. Today, it can be seen in theaters, movies, and the aforementioned Kyoto, where geisha and maiko still roam the street.
Number 10, no lice. You know in elementary school when they would check everyone for lice and one poor sucker had to get their head shaved and walk around as that bald kid for like a month and would probably get bullied? Well, that ain't gonna happen back in ancient Egypt because everyone shaved their heads to avoid lice back then, and priests would shave their whole bodies just like Michael Phelps. Instead of having actual hair of their own, they would wear wigs. Wigs sometimes made of human hair. That honestly was a lot better in that harsh desert sun. Lice and other little pests like that, like fleas, were not wanted. And yeah, they still aren't, but it led to some honestly interesting solutions. For example, a warm potion of date meal and water was believed to drive away fleas and lice. They would use cat's fat to keep away mice, I made a rhyme, and one that probably actually did something was when they used a solution of natron, water, and salt in their humble abodes to eliminate and repel fleas.
Number 9. Ancient sunscreen. As soon as summer comes around, game over. I burn so easily. That's why I'm a fan of winter. I don't have to keep applying sunscreen to my face all day, all night, and feel like I'm about to faint, obviously. Canada gets quite hot. But how did Egyptians beat the heat in ancient times? What was their trick? They didn't have banana breeze, SPF 90, whatever the hell it is. Ancient Egyptians valued their skin as a symbol of beauty, right? You think your morning skincare routine requires a lot of work? Think again, Laura. Their routine was written on tomb walls and scrolls. Rice bran containing UV absorbing gamma oryzanol was used to block the sun off. Yeah, it was that hard. Jasmine as well helped repair sun damage, and ancient Greeks as well. They used olive oil as sunscreen as well as ancient Egyptians, which as far as UV protection goes, it did absolutely nothing. You'd be burnt and extremely dehydrated, but also you'd have some nice tan lines and you wouldn't be as pale as me, so it wasn't all bad.
Number 8, the finest of cosmetics. The cosmetics of ancient Egypt were not just for looking good, they were for feeling good too. Like on the inside. Now, as such, those professionals who made the stuff took it pretty seriously. Not just because of a passion for the art, but also because they'd be judged pretty damn harshly if they did a bad job. If they sucked, it would mean having the whole neighborhood give you a bad reputation. And in the cosmetics business, just like show business, it's all about that reputation. It would also mean some harsh judgment from the big boys upstairs, meaning the gods when you met the afterlife. So yeah, they wanted to do a good job, and to meet that end they would try and use the finest of ingredients, as they should when people have to put this stuff on their skins and right next to their eyes and stuff.
Number 7, deodorant. Before the Old Spice guy was born, what did people even do to smell good? What happened? Deodorant was actually first introduced to the public back in the late 1800s. It was called Mum. It was a cream that used zinc oxide. It was stored in a metal container, nothing like Speed Stick at all. It wasn't discreet or anything. It was bad. But ancient Egyptians, even worse. They had to use ostrich eggs when it came to smelling good in the pits. They made perfumes as well and were among the first to use any type of deodorant, so that's a pretty good start. Thank you so much, ancient Egyptians. Hence the ostrich egg factor. They had to start somewhere. They mixed a little fat, tamarisk, tortoise shell, and then nuts, and bam, there you go, you're ready for the day, just pop it on. Another method was a little more yummy than the ostrich eggs and nuts method. Egyptians would use porridge balls. Yeah, flavored porridge rolled up and securely tucked under your arms. Honestly, that seems like a better alternative. Sometimes when you put antiperspirants like deodorant on, it gets like it all crumbles apart. It's like feta cheese all of a sudden. You're like, what happened to this stick? I would rather have porridge balls than just call it a day. Boom.
Number 6, get this man a Tic Tac or something. Just like I use mints to cure my nasty tea breath, which I argue is worse than coffee breath, the ancient Egyptians used breath mints to keep things fresh. Honestly, they actually sound kinda good. Frankincense, cinnamon, melon, pine seeds, and cashews put together, ground up, and bound together in candy using honey. Just heat that bad boy over the fire and let it cool, and boom, breath mints. I like it. I like it a lot. These breath mints would be made commercially by those fine cosmeticians and dentists, or they could even be made at home. Some archaeological finds of bowls, jars, and other dishes suggest that they may have been candy dishes that would hold the lovely tasting little suckers. Always gotta keep things fun, fresh, and flirty back in ancient Egypt. And breath mints would certainly help you do the trick. Nice.
Face washing brought in controversial hand washing. Contrary to popular belief, some groups of the medieval people actually washed their hands multiple times a day. Jewish people in particular made sure to wash their hands before eating, and Christians adopted the same practice. But even unreligious peoples would sometimes wash their hands after eating, since a lot of people didn't own utensils, and wiping your hands on fabric ain't always gonna do it. Case in point, honey garlic wings. In upper class families, guests specifically were always requested to wash their hands by pouring water out of a pitcher called an aquamanile, which was poured over a basin. These aquamaniles were often in the shape of lions or people or mythical creatures. However, no one was washing to the extent of using soap for 20 seconds. The water in these small pitchers needed to be shared among a large group of people, so people in the Middle Ages simply splashed water in their hands before drying and poured the dirty water right back in to wash someone else's fingers later. But you'd think that soap would be involved, especially because endless people essentially had a dark age Etsy store. Today, soap is made out of essentially the same products every time. Back in the Middle Ages though, people used a lot of different substances in a cauldron, like witches making a potion just trying to produce some semblance of soapy stuff that don't smell bad. Most successful was a combination of lime, wood ash, lard, and oil. Black soap, aka soft soap, gets its name from the dark color of the wood ash lye used to make it, and the cast iron it was often boiled in. Hard soap was made with high quality barilla ashes, which creates a light colored lye. Therefore, white soap quickly became equated with high quality hard soap. The stiff soap was then molded into cakes and bars, added dried flowers to the outer side, and the quality and scent of the soap changes depending on how wealthy someone is. Unfortunately, in case you didn't catch the keyword in there a few times, folks made soap with lye, which is so harsh it can remove skin if you scrub a little too hard. Next is how the world could have had toilet paper faster if they weren't judgy wipers. China had toilet paper figured out as early as the 6th century, making small squares of rice paper that would decompose into the ground and take the feces with it. Pretty eco-friendly stuff. However, the Europeans found this to be horrifying because they thought it was disgusting that the Chinese only wiped without actually washing their backside with water. Meanwhile, in Europe, they're using a communal sponge on a stick that sat in a bucket of water that wouldn't be changed all day, so please tell me which is more unsanitary and horrifying. In medieval Europe, people sometimes used devices called gonfas, or a gonf stick, as well as a torchicule, or a torch cut. The gonf sticks were sponges on a stick as described, while the torchicule was anything to wipe the bottom, like straw or moss or leaves or wood. You know, the basics. Who has time to care about eye bags though when you're walking around wearing a gag preventer nose bag? Even though medieval people clean their bodies a little bit more than you'd imagine, that doesn't mean the towns were sparkling clean. When you stepped outside, you came face to face with human waste, rotting food, and trash-riddled streets. Horses regularly relieved themselves on the street, as did the live animals in the markets, and so did the people. Also, animals just kind of died in places and people would leave them there. Add in the smell of mold from straw houses and the smell of diseased human or animal skin, and sometimes even corpses. These bad smells were at their worst in cities and large towns. Things were so incredibly smelly, people nearly gagged, especially when it all began to bake under the hot summer sun and heat. So in order to combat the smell, some people wore nose bags, which were fabric-like masks that were filled with flowers and other fragrances that would be able to help the stomach smell the streets filled with waste. Men and women would put noses in the nose bag, give them a huff, and life is good again. The lesson here, be thankful for breeze and use it. And of course, the weirdest for last, the ear spoon. Sounds promising, doesn't it? While nowadays people use Q-tips to clean your ears, which apparently we aren't even supposed to be doing, as cringeworthy as it sounds, people used long wooden or metal spoons called ear spoons or ear picks to remove the wax. Ear picks were also frequently made of bone, ivory, and brass as purely utilitarian items. Archaeologists have found them amongst the Vikings primarily, where it was common for them to carry an ear spoon on a chain around their neck so that they never have to be without their little tool should they ever have to degunk themselves. Ear spoons were used by all levels of society in medieval and post-medieval England following the Tudors. The 17th century English knew about plaque, which they called scale, and they were encouraged by their doctors to scrape their teeth frequently. So these little little doodads expanded to include that purpose. And how could I not mention that while a tailor normally would use beeswax to coat thread and make it stronger and easier to use, with no bees available, earwax would do. As gross as it may seem to us today, earwax was worth saving and selling.
Number 10, the forbidden toothpaste. If I looked into your bathroom right now, what would I see? Oh, you forgot to flush the toilet. If it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. Seems you've forgotten your own golden rule there. What I was actually looking at was for a flavor of toothpaste that you had. Classic mint, maybe you got cinnamon. Maybe you go for the whole bamboo toothbrush charcoal toothpaste vibe. Hey, I respect it. Good on you for making better choices. But bad on the Aztecs for making gross choices. Ever look at some forbidden lemonade and think, hey, add some salt to this, and now we got ourselves a bona fide toothpaste? Of course you didn't, because you ain't a crazy person. Or at least I hope you're not. But yeah, Aztecs used to brush their teeth with an unholy mixture of golden broth, pee, and salt. Yeah, why would you add salt to pee? I think it cleans teeth, sure. You just have to borrow an Egyptian breath mint after. It's no big deal, it's fine. It's good for your teeth, it's fine. Number 9, high stakes. Any good game of a sport will have you at the edge of your seat and dropping all cheese flavored snacks around you, just so you can keep your eyes glued to the screen. The Aztecs did not have access to such finger-licking good things like Doritos, but what they did have was a sport that was very high stakes. Maybe too high, actually. As if you didn't win, it could very well cost you your life. A game called, here we go, Chris is gonna like me pronouncing this, called Unsettling. With its 9-pound rubber ball and eye-shaped court, players had to pass the ball through a small stone ring. This game was taken very seriously, like ritual serious, and you didn't want to be on the losing side, as it may cost you your head. Yes, even sports events in modern times have gotten violent, sure. But if we started lopping off heads for our losses, well, Tom Brady would have a lot more blood on his hands, wouldn't he? Number 8, hot chocolate. As a Canadian, I cannot tell you how important the medicinal qualities that are a hot chocolate on a wet, cold winter's day. You've been slipping and sliding down a snow hill for hours, and your snow pants are soaking wet. Partially from the snow, and also because your dad made you go down the super scary hill and it was too much for you. Don't tell mom. Hot chocolate was important for the Aztecs too, more so just chocolate actually. It was used for a number of things. First off, after the beans have been roasted, they smell amazing, so it most likely went into some perfumes and other lovely smelling things that they used. It was also used as currency, strangely enough, and it was also used as a ritual drink, except they didn't exactly have sugar, so they used other things, other ingredients like peppers and other unusual flavor enhancers for chocolate. Pepper, I never understood that. People are like, it's hot, like Mexican hot chocolate, it's pepper and chocolate. It's a weird hot spicy chocolate. Not a fan. Number 7, corn goddess. I like corn just as much as the next guy. Roasted, boiled, and on the cob. Slap some salted butter on that bad boy, whew, it's time to dig in. Make sure you got the corn on the cob holders though. The little metal thingies that you'll probably end up stabbing yourself with later, that's just how it goes. Besides backyard summer barbecues, corn was an important staple of the Aztecs. So important that they had a festival to honor the corn goddess. Which to me is kind of a lame thing to be a god of, but alright, let's run with it. Zilonan Festival had the women let their hair loose and green corn placed in it to honor the god, the corn god. A forced female volunteer was dressed as the goddess, and after many days of what I'm assuming is eating and worshipping corn, the forced volunteer was sacrificed by the people to once again honor the corn god. You'd think a bowl of corn would do the job, but no, she's got a lust for blood, so that means off with the head. Number 6, end times. We all know what ancient civilizations are like with predicting the future, or more specifically, predicting the end times. Mayans thought everything was going to fade to black in 2012. Did it? Some people really thought this was going to happen. I always thought that Buddy just didn't get around to finishing the thing, but hey, whatever works. Well, if it was real, why didn't the world end? Well, the Aztec answer to that was the new fire ceremony. Another ceremony, why not? Basically, every once in a while, things got a little crazy. It was a time to cleanse, a spring cleaning, if you will. People stopped working, destroyed household items, and at the end of a 5-day cycle, some priests would take a dude up a volcano and toss him in there like I toss away bad report cards from my mother. All this to prevent the end of the world. Virus, act of God, bad hygiene. Whatever it was, just good old-fashioned blanket solution.
Number 5. Pole vaulting. The day pole vaulting was born was December 25th, 1521. It was a Christmas miracle, some would say. A laborer named Robert Baker, he was heading home from the church after a Christmas gathering. Severe floods interrupted his normal commute home, classic medieval flash floods. So Robert Baker, the quick thinker that he is, he grabbed a tall pole and he just vaulted his way over this new stream that had appeared. And then he continued home. He just carried the stick home and he was like, what have I done? What have I invented? Now at Bumblebee, we don't recommend this as a commute. Don't pole vault over things in general, unless you're a professional, don't do that. Because later on, when attempting that same stunt, Baker's pole snapped mid-leap and he ended up drowning. Yeah, the poor guy bridged to Terabithia himself. You don't want anything to happen like that. That's really bad. Again, in 1540, a similar case. Somebody tried to leap over a pond, but the pole wasn't strong enough and it broke and they drowned. Do you pole vault? If so, comment down below how scary it is to learn, because I'm interested. I don't know. Number 4, falling bacon. If they ever made a Final Destination movie that takes place in medieval times, that'd be an odd pitch. This would be the opening scene, for sure. This is crazy. Not sure how true this is, but if so, oh boy, my palms are sweating. It was February 12th, 1543, and Elizabeth Brown was working as a servant in the household of a man named Hugh Talmash. Now this was over in Huntingdon. Things were going swimmingly, I guess, until a tragic accident occurred. Elizabeth was the victim of a freak accident while sitting by the kitchen fire. A massive unsliced chunk of bacon was suspended in the chimney above her to smoke over time, and that day the rope decided to just go, and then said bacon ended up crushing her. Now if you're smoking meats, don't put it above or near you. That's a bizarre way to smoke meat. And also, if you're smoking meat, must be nice. That's a crazy charcuterie board. Number 3, outhouse troubles. This next one really stinks. My gosh. If you're eating food right now watching this, maybe skip to number 2. I won't take it personally. Here we go. On June 2nd, 1523, a Cambridge baker named George Duncan went out to his back garden to use the medieval outhouse, aka the cesspit. Now today they're built a little differently, but back in the day it was a massive hole with a wooden rim. It wasn't pretty, it didn't smell great, it was horrible, made you sick. Now Duncan, the poor lad, rumor has it, he was a little intoxicated, and Duncan, while doing his business, fell into said cesspit, leading him to suffocate to death in the worst way imaginable. Now it sounds like a crazy way to go in medieval times, but it can happen today as well. Because in 2014, 2 people lost their lives trying to recover a cell phone that fell into a porta potty. Yeah, imagine that. Losing consciousness in feces is a dangerous place to do it. That's very horrible. That's a horrible way to go out. That's the worst way to go. I think that's the worst. Number 2, clocks. Yeah, if you think a piano falling on your head is insane odds, now imagine a clock. Welcome to the medieval times. The 16th century saw the beginning of clockmaking, and early on these things, they were units. They were massive. Great-grandfather clocks, these early mechanical pieces, they were made of metal and were chock full of machinery. Weight equals danger, and in 1513, a man named John Townsend was holding an iron clock, very proud, when all of a sudden it slipped from his hand and it hit the young man right next to him. William Brett. It hit him right in the forehead, and the next day Brett died of his injuries. Guy died because he got hit with a clock. What a way to go. And finally, number 1, horse racing. I think it's general knowledge at this point, but standing near a racehorse equals not a good idea. Right, you heard it here first on Bumblebee. January 16th, 1540, 2 riders named Henry Headlam and Brian Newton, they were racing back and forth along a wall in a garden right outside of London. Casual medieval time stuff, just racing horses. Now, Newton's horse was going quite fast, and Newton didn't realize that he was approaching an elm tree. Now, his head hit a branch from the tree, and he broke his neck and died the next day. Now, right after this first tragic death, racing was seen as a danger to spectators and riders. More than fair. Riding a live animal at top speed, yeah, that's obviously a little bit dangerous, I would assume. But then in 1534, Jane Jonies was just watching, not even riding, she was watching horse racing, and then out of nowhere, a horse trampled her. Yeah, 4 days later, her injuries got the best of her. So if you're watching any live horse racing this afternoon, I don't know, have some distance maybe. Move up a couple of seats in the stands. Horse racing is big in Ontario for some reason. I don't know, we have like one big one, constantly busy.
Number 10, wash your hands. No, seriously, go wash your hands right now. When was the last time you washed those filthy mitts? Go wash your hands. Washing your hands is super important, especially these days. But something that's very unusual about the Aztecs compared to a lot of other civilizations in history is that, well, they did wash their hands. Oh, and you have no idea how happy that makes me. No more shall I have to think about people shaking hands after using the bathroom with no toilet paper. That's disgusting. Or scooping food onto a plate with their bare, dirty hands and sharing that food with the rest of their families. Yes, the Aztecs like to wash their hands before and after a meal, which is just the way it should be. I hate having grimy hands. You know, I talked to the chief today, and you know what he said? That's it. That's actually it. Yeah, we like that. That's it. Number 9. Aztec Barbershop. It must have been quite the sight for Spanish conquistadors to land upon the shores of North America and then come to bear witness the Aztec civilization in all its glory. Something noticed by the curious Europeans was that the Aztecs had what looked like a barbershop for men. After all, a healthy scalp is a happy one. Even more interesting than that, however, is women were dyeing their hair with a green herb that I'm not even going to begin to pronounce. It was just too hard. It was a lot of X's and T's. I couldn't do it. Which produced a purple shine to their hair. Some women even shaved their hair off, while older women, like mothers, had longer hair. Man, it's almost as if a beautiful civilization was starting to flourish. Well, I'm sure nothing bad ever happens to the Aztecs, right? Number 8. My heroes. Let me create a scenario for you. I like creating scenarios. Let me create a scenario for you. You're on the way to a certain event that is very important in the big city. Maybe it's a new job, a new summer fling, or something that requires dry pants. But now your stomach is acting up. It's big angy. Your stomach's making sounds that are becoming more audible, and you can feel soon you will require a bathroom. But you hold it in. I can make it past this event and then go, you say to yourself. No problem. But now you've got cramps, sweats, and you're getting anxious as you know that DEFCON 1 is approaching. You now have to make a decision to make a rush to find a bathroom or be late for your event, or take a gamble with your underwear and dignity. Yes, that is a feeling I know all too well, but perhaps I should have been living in the Aztec Empire, as they had public washrooms all over the city. That's just awesome. Oh, what sweet relief. As if that weren't the most unusual, they also had citizens cleaning the streets, which is pretty unusual for the time. Yes, cleanliness was very important to the Aztecs, and honestly, I think there should be public toilets on every street corner. Please, sometimes I gotta go. Number 7. Thirsty. After a trip to the public washrooms, you may need a drink of water to rehydrate yourself. I mean, come on. I know I could use some hydration after that. Sometimes it gets really sweaty in there. Well, it's a good thing that the Aztec cities had canals, and not just the kind of canals a small Italian gentleman drives a boat through on Valentine's Day, but canals that handled both transportation and irrigation. Aztecs knew just how important water was for life, but perhaps most unusual about the Aztecs is their night soil collectors, which honestly sounds like it's hiding something just in that name. Night soil. Basically, they were beta garbage collectors who used canoes to transport this night soil to farms for fertilizer. And yes, night soil is exactly what you think it is. Poop! But it's unusual for a civilization to be so conscious of where their waste goes. Don't believe me? Well, how about this summer we all get together, we all go up to New York City and take a dip in the Hudson River. Yeah, not many takers, didn't think so. They were doing their best with what they had. And if women don't find you handsome, they should at least find you handy. You know what I'm saying? Number 6, ye olde dentistry. Look, every time I find a decent dentistry fact, I slap that bad boy in here like a D-based infomercial host with a surprisingly effective kitchen gadget. You're gonna love my nuts. Remember that guy? This is just one of those facts. Do I have a fear of the dentist? No. No, I don't, because my dentist is nice and has all the modern amenities to make me feel at ease. A comfy chair, laughing gas, and putting Peppa Pig on the TV because I'm a big baby. Goo goo gaga. However, no amount of any of those things I mentioned can prepare you for the dentistry before the year 1900. It was crude to say the least, but hygiene is hygiene, and you gotta keep that mouth fresh and clean. Tooth infections were fixed with rubbing charcoal in the affected area, and if that wasn't enough, a super safe mixture of snake venom and vinegar was used. What? Okay. Who was the first guy that discovered snake venom had such healing properties? Probably the same weirdo who first milked a cow, if I had to guess. Aztec dentistry included fillings and tooth removal as well. Also, ladies of the evening dyeing their teeth distinct colors, so then you know, if you know. You know? Look at my red teeth, boys.
Number 5, the Great Stink. The what? What? Oh, no, yeah, I read that right. The Great Stink of 1858 was an event in central London in the summer, during which the hot weather exaggerated and amplified the smell of untreated human waste and gunk that had washed up on both in and on the banks of the River Thames. The problem had been growing for years with an out-of-date technology and overflowing sewage system that emptied directly into the river. The stank was thought to have been the root cause of a number of contagious diseases and 3 outbreaks of cholera before it was agreed upon that a small problem was emerging. You think? Long story short, all the garbage, human waste, bloated bodies were all just washing up around the same time. Hey, I caught one! No, that's an arm. Okay. And just cooking in all that sun all day? I know what August feels like, and I've smelt my garage on garbage day, and I can't imagine the smell already in central London at that time. And for people to have complained so much that it was even stinkier, that's absolutely rotten. Number 4, nose gaze. I was just thinking, where are all these inventions and blueprints on how to stop the smell? If you can knit metal into a crop top, you can cover your mouth and nose, can't you? Well, close enough. Nosegays were invented. Basically just big nose plugs one would wear day to day to drown out the smell of absolute filth. Just plug it up and ignore it was their mentality. A makeshift wad of bunched up herbs and flowers shoved up your nose, blocking the nasal cavity from the stank that followed. Just see number 5. A potpourri for each nostril. Would this make things worse? Ignoring the smell? Wouldn't that make it even harder to find out where it's coming from? Nope, just band-aid it. It's gonna disappear on its own. We're humans, we're designed to smell stuff for our own survival. The smell is like what lets us know not to go down there. Whoa, no. Like, wouldn't everything just smell like roses at that point? These people were trying to avoid the stinky streets because that actually meant that's where the infection and disease was actually hanging out. The blind leading the blind. Number 3, flushing. Okay, we're making some ground here. We got toilet paper, we got something for the smell. So now where do we put it? Well, plumbing and flushing wasn't connected to each house like it is today. See, the Greeks and Romans had it down to a science. They built drainage systems and learned from the ancient Mesopotamian people how to exactly deal with the problem of waste. A system of pipes, tubes, and drains. The bathroom problem seemed like an easy solution. Use gravity downhill to dispose of the waste outside the city. And here's the kicker. It can even be reused and repurposed at the end as an irrigation system, further nurturing the farming of crops. No, that's good. No, he's right. And then it disappears and literally goes downhill again. After the Roman Empire had fallen, this European dark sanitation era had begun, and hygiene sort of just slipped away. People weren't really concerned with things like disease and plague, and instead leaned into real science like witchcraft or burning cats for fun. You know, important stuff. It wasn't until about the mid-1850s where people revisited this age-old problem and recreated and did exactly the same thing science we already knew. Things were unnecessarily stinky for way too long. It wasn't until the British colonies started tinkering in Boston around the 1700s that proper piping and toiletry transport was eventually built and cataloged. Thus was born the first sanitation system, again, and we still see it today, thank God. Number 2, disinfectants. How did people exactly know if something was clean or not? They couldn't have just seen the particles back then. Let's hear a chamber pot. Smells clean. People were plugging their noses so they couldn't even smell anything. They couldn't smell if it was clean or not. There certainly wasn't a demand for a fresh lemon scent that we're all used to. This was the birth of some basic antiseptic. Chemists were mixing and matching chemicals, and a new form of cleaning agent was introduced in the 1890s by German chemist science Gustav Ruppenstrock in hopes to rid the country of the overflowing cholera epidemic and seize the spread of germs and the disease. By mixing benzalkonium and hydrogen peroxide, you were left with a chemical compound that would destroy and clean infections on medical patients. Light bulb. Thus leaning towards the direction of an all-purpose surface cleaner, killing bacteria and ridding the area of harmful toxins. And drum roll please, Lysol was created. That's right, the same Lysol we use today. This was a push in the right way for humanity. An easy to use liquid cleaner that would aid disinfecting everything in its way. I've seen the bottle and the Wemyss labels. Must have been even stronger back then too. Hope no one spilled it on themselves in testing. Ooh, ouch, that is a class 1 chemical burn. You're just gonna wanna pee on that for 12 to 13 days. And number 1, soap. Finally, the end of all our ailments. Soap. The answer. Well, not really. See, it's been around since the Romans, because they literally did everything before us, and stop bragging, we get it. Made out of animal fats, ash, and mostly lye, these makeshift balls of soap were invented years ago. and then forgotten, and then invented again, and then forgotten again. Cleanliness was loose, remember, and it was almost uncool to believe in science, and it wasn't really until the mass production of this chemical detergent that it really stuck. Soap was predominantly sold, produced, and commercialized in the late 1800s. By this time, scientists were fiddling around with things like Lysol and more chemical compounds, sparking its way to the study of germs. A vital step towards large-scale soap production, and it actually started in 1791, when a French chemist Nicolas Leblanc patented a system for making soda ash from salt, at which point added with animal fat, and there you have it. The slippery bar we're all used to today. The discovery made soap making one of America's fastest growing industries in 1850, and it seemed from then on in it was only up. It's crazy to think that someone at this time, even after soap was invented, were still spit-shining surgical instruments to be clean. That's pretty cool.